When everybody's ready, we'll get started. Please get a copy of this handout that the LBA has provided us with. I will start with an overview of the total budget. Then we'll go to the sections that Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. The budget is so big, so many pages, that no one committee can go over every page. So we split it up into 3 divisions, and as we come to the division discussions, they will explain to you what part of the budgets each division does. So we begin with this House briefing. The good news is this is the first year without the interest and dividends tax, the first budget without the interest and dividends tax, and yet we have managed. The budget, the budget that the governor gave us was a lot more than what Ways and Means estimated we would have for spending, like $800 million. Now, I want to start with the pie charts on page 2. Now, this is a very important thing. This is the general fund. The general fund, as you will see later, is only a small part of the total budget, but is the one most affected by taxes. That's where all the taxes go, from 17 different taxes that I won't go over right now. So you see that Category 5, Health and Social Services, is 55%, the big blue section of page 2, Health and Human Services. That's a huge part of our budget. Then you go on to Category 5, Education, that's 12% of the general fund. Then Category 2 is General Government. That includes the House, the Senate, the Governor's Office, and so on. Category 2 is the Administration of Justice and Public Protection. That, of course, is the courts and the Department of Justice and some parts of safety, but not much of it. Then Category 3 is Resource Protection and Development. That's a little bit of money going to the other agencies like Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, Department of Environmental Security. And Category A is Transportation. That's just a small piece which we hope to eliminate in further budgets by increasing the funding in Department of Transportation. They have their own special fund. So that's just a piece. Page 2, General Funds. Now you look at page 2, there's the total budget. This is what we propose. We propose $16.267 million versus the governor's budget, which was about $16.7 million. No, that's billion, 16.7. It's 16,267 million, or 16 billion, 16.2 billion. So the governor started at 16.7. This is the total budget now that we look at. In this case, the big blue piece is still Health and Human Services, the biggest piece. This time it's 43% because we put it in the total budget. And now we see how big education is. There's still 21.6% of this overall budget. General government, again, is a pretty big piece. I described what that was. Category 2, now you see the size of transportation, but this is self-funded in the main. So that $1,596.5 million is largely funded by gasoline tax, registrations of vehicles, the other things that are, and some federal money also goes to them in large part. Then Resource Protection and Development, again, some of their money is self-funded, and I'll get to that later. So there you get a good look at the total funds. The total budget is $16.267 billion. Now going on to page 4, this is where the revenue comes into that total budget. This is where we get funds for the budget. And you will see what a big part of the budget federal funds are. They're still about 32%. They've been about 32% for the last 3 budgets. I think before that they were a little less, maybe 30%. But they're still one of the biggest parts of the budget. Then the general fund, the yellow piece on page 4, is only 24%. Education trust fund, because we've taken some of the money to the general fund, is 11%. Other funds, there are many agencies that are basically self-funded. And banking, insurance, labor, they all assess those they supervise with an assessment so they go up automatically every year, but some of the things that are funded by fees do not. We looked at the fees like for Department of Transportation. They keep complaining that because everybody's getting better mileage and people are driving electric cars, they're not getting as much gas tax. Well, we looked at what it costs to register a car. We said, how long ago was the price of an automobile registration gone up? They went back 25 years and they still couldn't find how long ago was the last big increase. Some of them were in 2006, but that was just a very small amount. So by increasing the cost to register a car, that's user fee. That's what fees should be, user fees. They're going to go up quite a bit, but since they haven't gone up in 25 years, what's to be expected? So, Representative Edwards. All right, he's coming back. So that's to be expected. All right, we're still on page 4. And you will see the highway fund is now a pretty big piece there, the 3.8%. The liquor fund, again, basically self-funded, but we also use some of that money for other things. And then sweepstakes fund, again, all that money goes into the fund, and the majority of it doesn't go for prizes or for administration, which is less than 10%, goes into the fund. Most of that goes for education. Turnpike fund, they're self-supporting. They're supported by the tolls that are collected on the turnpike. Federal funds, as I said, they're a pretty big part. Now we look at page 5. Page 5. Here's again where the revenue comes in for the general fund. You see now all the taxes that we collect. You see how business taxes is the main one. Liquor sales, a smaller part. Court fines and fees, we've gone up with those because, again, they hadn't gone up in over 20 years. They've gone up a bit, which will help the court system. Securities revenue, what that is every time somebody wants to sell a general fund, not a general fund, one of those funds that contains several different stocks, that has to be registered. And we collect a fee, and that's what runs the securities revenue. Insurance taxes, that's a 2% tax on all the insurance that you pay. That's a pretty good piece of it because a lot of people are buying insurance. Communications tax, you see that in your phone bill. There's about 5 different taxes on your phone bill. There's one of them. Beer tax, that's been about the same for years. Medicaid recoveries, those are something we're working on. In this budget, there'll be a small copay for Medicaid patients. Hopefully, that will mean they will use it less. They will give some judgment. I remember when I was in the Air Force and medical care were free, people went there for every little sniffle because they got a free package of pills or something. If you had to pay $5 for that appointment, you might have gone and bought some nasal spray instead of going and taking the time of a doctor or a nurse. So we're hoping that a slight copay will reduce some of the Medicaid use. And then there's about 100 different things in that. Some of it is like interest on monies we invested. Some of it is other payments that are made that are too numerous for me to list, but many of them small, but altogether they add up. All right, so that's the overall, the important. It is gone, but where do you see it? That's the stuff left over from the previous one, but it won't be there forever. So this is a small piece, 8.7 million. That's down from what normally was 100 million a year. So that's the last little bit that's left for the people that paid late, if you will. So the payment came, it was assessed last year, but some of them didn't pay till this year. Thank you for catching that, Mike. So next we go on to divisions, and the chairman of Division 1 is Representative McGuire. He will give you the discussion on Division 1 and the changes they made. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was there a question before I go on to that? That's the monies left over from people that got the tax assessed in '24 but are late paying it. There would have been $8.7 million less.
So, Mr. Chair, could you repeat the question or have people go to the microphone so we can all...
All right, so you didn't all hear that. A question of the interest and dividends tax, which Representative Harrington caught, that it was on page 5. Why is it still there, since this is the first biennium that we won't be collecting it? Had we been collecting it, it would have been over 100 million a year. But because we eliminated it, there were still late payments. They were assessed in 2024, but they're being paid in 2020, or they would have been assessed in 2025. They're being paid in 26 because they were late in payments. Push down and get a red button.
My question was, I wanted to have a sense of what the tax cut was in total. Had we still had an interest and dividends tax, what would have been the revenue otherwise?
If we had not eliminated interest and dividends and tax, that piece would have been about 200 million rather than 8.5 million, or
Okay,
8.7.
so my follow-on question is, what did you cut in order to have your budget without that money?
That will be covered by divisions. It's
Okay.
many small cuts, hundreds of different places.
All right, thank you.
Okay?
Yeah, excuse me, Ken.
Before we move on to
Ken, over here. Question. Going back to 4, the federal funds, with all the talk we've heard about, Trump clawing back money and changing this, how solid is this 32% of the budget, or are we in danger of seeing some major cuts to that funding?
most of those are on like 3-year grants, and it's hard to say which ones started, which ones went. A lot of those, from what I'm hearing from the federal government, things that affected Medicare and Medicaid, they will try to keep going steady as they are. Things that help the individuals will try to keep up. Main places they're eliminating federal funds thus far was illegal payments in Social Security. USAID was billions of dollars, and they're going after things that were paid that should not have been paid. But from what I'm hearing from the federal government, those things that people have come to depend on individually, they expect to continue. So there's some feeling that even though we won't get the so-called Inflation Reduction Act payments, a lot of that went for one-time payments, and a lot of the other things that were things they went for something we built. And maybe we won't build as many, or maybe we already built them. So the federal funds that come in, and they're scattered throughout. They're in the highway department, they're in fish and game, they're heavily in health and human services, they're in education. There are so many places they are scattered that it would be difficult, even environmental security, all those places, they all got a piece of it in federal funds, and I think they realize it would be too great an effort to try to trace all those down and just do a blanket thing. So from what I'm hearing from federal government, those that the state has come to rely on and use for individual things are fairly safe. And I hope that doesn't change. But as near as we
Mr.
know so
Chair?
far, it will be. All right, let's...
Mr.
let's-
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, question.
I think you just said that the funds from the federal government that help people personally should remain stable, but yet this budget contains significant cuts to Medicaid. If those funds are coming in, if that's stable, why are we cutting them?
There was an increase from most of the agencies that was probably about 6 or 7%. The governor tried to reduce it, but it seemed to me she was reducing it from their proposals rather than from what it was last year. They went up last year, and so does this budget. Last budget, as I said, this was 16.3% or 16.267. The governor gave us 16.7. The previous budget was 14.6, I think, billion. So there's a considerable increase. And some of that is due to the cost of everything, the cost of fuel oil, the cost of gasoline. Some of that's still gone up a little bit. And wages has continued to go up. So there's, people getting step increases, et cetera. There was no way to keep it perfectly flat. But because of these increases, and the revenue hasn't been going quite as well as we thought. We hoped for a little more, but the business taxes are actually a little behind. We hope that's a trend that will not continue, but many of the other taxes, insurance tax was pretty healthy, and so were like liquor and a lot of the other ones. But as we say, there's such a combination that we try to deal with it, but nevertheless, we were looking back at departments. One of the big things that we cut, so we've been hearing for probably 5 years, we can't find people to fill the jobs. And I remember at one point it was 16% vacancies within agencies, overall, about 16%. Okay, some of those we stopped funding. We were still funding probably 10% of those vacancies. As we looked at them, we went to the treasurer and said, show us the paychecks that you cut each of those months. Because when I'd ask the people directly, they'd come in looking for 122 people in their agency. If I asked them, how many are really working? I didn't get a straight answer. I got a song and dance. Well, we got some that are getting ready to retire. We got some that are in the pipeline. We got some that are doing this. We got some we're interviewing. You never got a straight answer until I went to the treasurer and said, show me the paychecks by months. So you're coming in and asking for 122 people, and wait a minute, you've never had paychecks for more than 115. Okay, so there's a bunch of people that we're paying for, and there's nobody there. So some of those cuts came from those funded but vacant jobs, and long time vacant, not just for the last couple of months, but for a year. So yeah, some of those were advertised as big cuts because they cut money from that agency. But some of it were money that wasn't even being spent. They would probably use it to lapse. Oh, we made our lapses. We expect 3 or 4% lapses. That's how they make them. Because if you get money in a personnel line, you can't transfer it to equipment. You can't transfer it to anything other than pay and benefits, et cetera. Anyway, if I can go on now to Division 1, Representative McGuire is waiting. Turn to the page for Division 1, please. Thank you, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll turn to page 6 here, and I'll run through, hopefully fairly quickly, what we did in Division 1. Division 1 has all the sort of smaller miscellaneous agencies. I think the count is something like 60. But, so let's just go through them. We gave, for the legislative branch and the governor's office, we actually have a small cuts over what the governor had in her budget. It's slightly more, it's somewhere in between. It's slightly more than what we had in the 24-25 budget. We eliminated a temp position at the Governor's Commission of Disability. Department of Information Technology is a very large department, but they spend money transferred to them from from all the rest of government, and it ends up being $250 million over the biennium. And so they're hard to adjust because they have projects all over the place. So we gave them, but they're a big amount of money, so when we needed savings, we gave them roughly what we call a back of the budget cut, which is we tell the commissioner to reduce their spending where they can by a certain amount, and the amount was roughly 5% compared to the governor's budget. Department of Administrative Services is another very large department because they oversee all the benefits that state employees get, so all the health insurance and all that sort of stuff. And they found a number of savings. They helped us out by finding a number of savings possible in their budget. One was this advertising on places like Indeed and LinkedIn and things like that for hiring, because we're not doing much hiring these days. And then the Sununu Youth Services Center is being decommissioned and will be, they'll have to do maintenance on it, but we're able to, we're not sure that maintenance will come to fruition, will happen in this coming biennium, and so we were able to put that off. We stopped the advertising for the paid family medical leave program. The program will continue, but we won't advertise it. There's changes to retiree health insurance that saved us $4 million. Not to the benefit, but to the way we fund the benefit. It's all sort of an internal movement of money, sort of. Then we had a number of smaller boards, and some of them, when their function was sort of duplicitous or covered elsewhere, we simply eliminated. But others we combined to get some savings in their administration. And one of them was this Personnel Appeals Board. There's a number of boards where they kind of have expert attorneys mostly, or other people with other skills that they pay kind of on a case-by-case basis. They deal with, in this case, personnel complaints. And so they have a little bit of staff to answer the phones and set things up and deal with cases. But then when the case needs some expert decision making, then they pay the board members case by case. And so we combined three such entities into one. One's called the Public Employee Labor Relations Board, one's this Personnel Appeals Board, and one is the Right to Know Ombudsman. And I think we saved $1 million or so by combining them and giving them a common staff. We eliminated the Commission on Aging. That's sort of somewhat of an internal lobbying group. There's plenty of outside people that have the interests of the elderly and come and testify and do work for them. So we felt that was more of a nice to have than a necessary board.
Question, please.
Can I finish or not?
Rep. Haskins from Exeter. So the Commission on Aging in the second oldest state in the country strikes me as unwise, I have two neighbors, one of whom is 92, the other is 90. I'm getting up there myself. I think for that amount of money, you might have seen the op-ed in the Union Leader by the executive director this week. I think it's very unwise, and I wondered if you thought it was worthwhile.
Look, everything in this budget, not only will it not satisfy everyone, I think it will not satisfy anyone, all right? Because that's impossible. We have to fund things that are absolutely necessary, and there are other things like this that are nice to have. I'm sure they help people and so on, but they are not absolutely necessary. It's as simple as that. All right, let me go on. Advocate for special education, they had, for some strange reason, there are two people there. One of them was a full-time temp, so we made that a permanent position. Otherwise, no change. We eliminated the Office of the Child Advocate. Again, there are many places and organizations and so on that have child welfare at heart, including our own Children and Family Committee. So this, again, was felt to be kind of a nice to have, but not necessarily absolutely necessary. Okay, Department of State. So Secretary of State's office, we asked them to reduce their budget by about $500,000 for the biennium. The Department of Revenue Administration is the tax collecting department. Essentially no change there from the governor's budget. They're getting a little more expensive because their computer operation is, they have a new computer that they're paying off over time, and that's starting to bite. State Treasury. We kept the distribution for rooms and meals to cities and towns flat at the fiscal year 2025 level. Personally, I wanted to make some more changes in that area, but that's going to be a House bill next year rather than something in the budget. That keeping it flat gained us maybe 11 million for the biennium, something like that. We have not yet bonded for the new men's prison, and so some money that was in the budget we won't have to pay it because there won't be any of those bond payments. So that's mainly it for the Treasurer's office. The retirement system. So there are two significant things in the budget for the retirement system, and I'll just briefly talk about it now, but maybe there'll be more questions. Well, actually, there's three main things. One is they asked for a very large increase in their expenses, and their expenses have been growing significantly over the past decade, and so the cost is imposed on all people who have retirement accounts because what they spend for their expenses comes right out of the money saved for retirement. So we are not letting them grow in their expenses the way they asked. We're essentially keeping them flat. Next one is there's a significant improvement in the retiree benefits for Group 2. Group 2 is corrections, police, and fire. So 80% of these employees are municipal employees, but there's 55 million in general funds in this budget to improve those retirement plans, and there's going to be 55 million over each budget for the next 4 budgets. So the total cost of this is significant, right? It's like 280 million or something like that. So it's a big amount of money. And then we also have something that essentially doesn't cost anything, but we're changing the structure of what the retirement system looks like for newly hired state employees. We're on a hiring freeze right now, so there's nobody in this category. But at some point, we will start hiring, and we're going to give them a retirement system which is more like what they would get in the private sector. And the current retirement system doesn't work for these people because well over half of them don't stay and get vested. They don't stay for 10 years, so they can't take advantage of our current retirement system. So we'll give them a system that's more like what they have in the private sector, and it will be, they'll get to keep the benefits that they earn. And that should help us with hiring, which we have a lot of difficulty with hiring right now. All right, judicial branch. So the judicial branch is the second biggest branch in the division, but they're the most opaque because they're a separate branch of government. We don't have vision into their set of employees and what they spend and so on. We basically write them one large check. And so we ask them to find some efficiencies and cut maybe $5 million or so from their budget, not a very large amount. We also are adding 2 judges to them, so in a sense they have to absorb that as part of their savings. But because we're eliminating the Board of Tax and Land Appeals, the Housing Appeals Board, and the Human Rights Commission, which are all sort of quasi-judicial, that's going to cause more cases in the judicial branch. Plus, they have all these YDC settlement cases, so we're adding 2 judges there. Next is Department of Military Affairs.
Question, please.
Question.
Dave Walker, Rochester. The Board and Land and Tax Appeal. You're eliminating that. So what are the options for taxpayers that want to appeal their assessment? Is it just the Superior Court?
Yes.
Well, you just downshifted the whole cost of that to your taxpayer. Because now you have to hire a lawyer, and the fees are higher for the Superior Court, not the Board and Land and Tax Appeal. So you just downshifted whatever you saved to the Superior Court to your taxpayer. Plus, a lot of elderly are intimidated to go to Superior Court, so they won't appeal it. So you're not doing a good service for your taxpayers. Keep that in mind.
Well, I guess we have to disagree on this one. Again, these agencies, while they deal with cases for low money compared, as far as fees go, they're very high money per case. The Superior Court costs us, even for the most complicated cases, about $1,500 a case. The Board of Tax and Land Appeals is in the thousands of dollars. $6,000 a case is what I remember. It might even be more than that. So the cost to the taxpayer is quite high for these sort of specialized boards. Same thing with the Housing Appeals Board. Okay.
But the problem is, a lot of people are intimidated to go to court. So they won't. So they won't be able to appeal their assessments, which is an injustice. And if we keep having disagreements, you're going to lose more and more votes before you get to the vote on this thing.
We have complaints that the user should pay for the service. And if an individual gets some advantage that everybody else is paying for, why are we paying for this individual? So this way, we're making the individual pay for what they wish, rather than having everybody pay. You pay $40, everybody else pays $6,000. It just didn't seem right when we'd hear complaints about make the user pay. Another question over here.
Yes, I have a question about the creation of a new group in the retirement plan. What kind of vetting did this get, and what does the retirement board say about it? And my biggest question is, if we had had this group 3 option for the last 5 years, what would the portfolio of the retirees, the workers that are in that system look like today?
All right. I guess if you guys don't mind, I would rather go through and finish and then take questions. What, you know, because it's we have to get through this whole thing, right? And then we can have questions afterwards, I think. Wouldn't that be better? Right?
Mr. Chair, so we've been going through one at a time, and I believe
People have been
if we put
people-
that to the back, we won't hear an answer at all.
Let's try to answer the questions
All
as they
right,
come.
all right. I don't mind. It's just that this is a long topic, right?
Okay.
So anyway.
The Human Rights Commission, we had a rather lengthy...
Tim,
Yeah.
could I answer the first question first and then go to your question?
Oh, yeah.
Is that all right?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
No, okay, so you haven't answered it yet. Okay.
All right. So the bill that is the defined contribution pension plan is a bill that went in ED&A committee 50-50, right? So it ended up getting tabled rather than discussed and voted on. So that's the bill. What it is the exact same kind of pension plan that everyone in the country has, or almost everyone, who works in the private sector. It's like a 401k, like a 403b, like an IRA, all that. It's a savings plan where it's a tax-free savings plan where the employer and the employee both contribute. They save money tax-free over their lifetime, and then at the end, they own the money and they can withdraw it at their own pace. And if they want to buy an annuity, they can do it. The problem we have is that this set of employees, regular state workers, not municipal workers, not teachers, not policemen, not fire, not corrections, but regular state workers tend to stay on the job very short periods of time. They're here for a few years, 5 years, 4 years, something like that. And then they leave and go off to some other job, right? And therefore, because they don't reach 10-year vesting, the money that the employer, the state, puts into their retirement plan on their behalf is lost. It's money they've earned, but they don't get it, okay? And that is unfair to them, and it makes employment with the state unattractive, all right? Today's workers in the United States as a whole work for 12 different employers over their career. They're changing jobs every 4 years or less. And when you talk about even younger workers, it's an even more rapid turnover. People change jobs very frequently. And if you have to work for the state for 10 years to get a retirement benefit, that's no benefit at all. So this is an important thing that will make state work more attractive to workers and not less. Okay. Can I go to Tim or not? No.
I got a question.
So
this is not an argument here, right? Anyway.
So I think there hasn't been anywhere near enough vetting on this, and that's a simplified explanation that doesn't cover what happens to local government workers and county workers, and an explanation of when somebody quits before they're vested or after they're vested, they get their money back that they put in.
They get their money back with some small interest rate. They do not get the employer's share.
Well,
of
the
pension.
reason it's only a small percentage rate is because the state doesn't change the law about how much they get in, and is unreasonably letting them keep a portion of what their money earned.
All right. This is an argument, not a question. Representative Horgan.
My question is about the Human Rights Commission, which, well, first it has a lot of operational issues, but we had a lengthy debate, I guess, at the last session where we're actually adding more cases to its docket. So what's the plan moving forward to get all those backlog of cases cleared out in a reasonable time, and then given that we're trying to actually add more cases to what the Human Rights Commission is doing, so
Yeah,
maybe
thank you for the question. So the Human Rights Commission is similar in some sense to the BTLA and the HAB in the sense that people with a human rights complaint can choose to take their complaint to court or to the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission has, so I wouldn't, unlike the BTLA and the HAB, which perform fine, it's just that they're expensive, the Human Rights Commission does not perform fine. We've had performance audits for them that are horrible, among the worst performance audits of any state agency. And so they are not clearing their backlog, they are not doing their job correctly. So we decided to simply eliminate them and allow people who have cases before them to move those cases to court with no fees, all right? So that's what's going to happen with them.
And that'll apply to any...
Follow-up?
Yes, a follow-up, yes, follow-up. So that will presumably apply to any new types of grievances, because as I said, we were trying to add some additional grievances that the commission would handle. So
Yeah.
those people who are aggrieved by those new provisions, if it gets, through the whole process, they'll also be like working in the Superior Court on it, so that...
Yes. That's assuming they're not suitable for the Personnel Appeals Board or the Public Employee Labor Relations Board. Those are still being.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
Question.
Representative Breyer.
Thank you. I'm actually receiving a pension now. But where I'm going to go with that is I've talked to several people at the state employees union, and just to let you know, based on my vetting, the state employees don't want this group 3. They actually want to be treated the same as what you're doing now is by beefing up the state police's pension, you're taking away from the regular state employees, and you're going to create class war between the employees. And I'm just putting that out there.
So are you, all right, let me see if I understand your question. Are you saying by improving the Group 2 pensions, that makes the Group 1 employees?
Group 3. No, not by approving the Group 1. Most of the Group 1 employees I'm talking to, and most of the employees that eventually come into the state prefer the current retirement system. They don't. There's not. I haven't talked to one state employee that says they like Group 3.
I'm guessing you've talked to people who have been here 10 years or more, right? So that is a very tiny fraction of the number of employees we actually hire, right? Because most employees stay here for 2 years, 3 years, et cetera, right? They don't stay for 10 years. A very tiny fraction end up getting any benefits at all from this pension system.
But that's my only comment.
I understand. Okay. May I go on? May I continue?
Well, as Representative McGuire said earlier, this is a good reason to have a defined benefit versus a defined contribution.
The other way around.
Because of the number of years you have to put in, and then when you leave, you only take a fraction of what went in for you. Where if you're in a defined benefit, you take everything that went in your name. I had 2 retirements in the airline, and one was defined benefit, one was defined contribution. They put in 7.5% toward my defined contribution. They put in 4% toward my defined contribution. When I was able to take them both as a lump sum, the 4% yielded 60% of the lump sum because it was defined contribution and it appreciated with the stock market.
And I know we're going through a rough patch right now, but I will tell you that I have both. I have pension and deferred comp. And my deferred comp has lost 20% in valuation since the tariffs went in.
3 days.
All right. So if I had a gavel, I would be using it at this moment. All right, let's continue. All right, because otherwise we're not going to get finished. So Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services, very small savings were made there, and a little bit of a fee increase happened there as well. Department of Agriculture, one way we got money to balance the budget was looked at fees that had not been changed in long periods of time. And so we did a number of fee increases at the Department of Agriculture, which gained us about $2.5 million for the biennium.
Before you leave that, Dan, just to comment on that.
Yes.
I look at this and I see the increase in fees are going to the general fund. Now, a user fee I look at as saying, I'm applying for a permit and I'm paying for the Department of Agriculture people to manage that permit and to issue it. If the money's going to the general fund, that's just another name for a tax. And we shouldn't be hiding this as call it what it is. It's a tax. Because if you're taking money for a user fee by increasing, some of these fees are increasing not like 20% or 25%, they're increasing 200% and 300%, and that's simply a tax increase, and we ought to call it what it is.
Well, in this particular case, when we're talking about the Department of Agriculture, their funding is the general fund. So when they're doing inspections of animals or pet food supplies or all this sort of stuff, they're being paid from the general fund. Their fees go into the general fund. Similarly, like court fees, all court fees go into the general fund, but all the costs of the court, those are very tiny compared to the overall costs of the court, which come from the general fund. So, I don't think your argument makes much sense. Representative Notter first, and then over here.
Thank you. Could you just go over what you cut from the military affairs and veteran services?
There was a bit of a fee increase for the cemetery plots of family members of a veteran, not veteran cemetery plot. And I don't remember what cut we had in terms of, I think it was a vacant position or something like that. It wasn't very significant.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so in the Department of Agriculture, some of the fees go into the general fund, as you explained. Some of them go into a regulatory services fund. Were the fees going into the regulatory services fund also increased?
We ended up increasing, I think it was 5 different fees, and we in fact added one fee for pet transfers. They currently do some inspections of people who sell pets, and so we put a $5 fee on the pet transfer to pay for those, to make those inspections self-funded. But I don't know, I don't have the list in front of me. Well, actually, I do have the list in front of me, if you want me to.
Actually, let's move on. This is a pretty tiny detail.
Yeah, I mean, this is a small thing. Anyways, okay. Where are we here? Department of Justice. So, the Department of Justice is one where their budget has increased very rapidly over the last decade. They used to have a budget of in the 20s, 20 million for the biennium, and now it's more like 40. So the budget has increased rapidly. We gave them a very severe back of the budget cut, and but part of it we expect is going to come from grants. They administer a large amount of federal grants that are going away. And so rather than have those grants being replaced with general funds, I think they're going to have to simply reduce them. But we left it up to the Attorney General to make those decisions. We also appropriated for the settlement funds for the YDC abuse cases. We settled one particular case for $10 million. We're told that this is essentially the most severe case. Someone who was abused dozens, if not more times. And so this is a very severe case. We allocated 10 million for that. We also allocated 10 million per year for the YDC settlement fund. My personal feeling is that it needs to be bigger because we essentially made a deal in the past to fund this over the next decade. But this is a very active and high-level discussion between the governor, the attorney general, and so on. So we funded it something, but maybe not as much as it will need to be at the end of the day. Okay. We already talked about the Public Employee Labor Relations Board, the Liquor Commission. The main thing we did with the Liquor Commission is, we did two things. One is we eliminated the law enforcement arm of the Liquor Commission. There's a great need for law enforcement elsewhere in corrections and in municipalities, and I assume in the state police as well, but I'm not sure. And so the Liquor Commission will be just a licensing activity similar to OPLC, not an enforcement arm in the same way that they are now. Then we have also, there was some sort of, this is just moving money around, but it had been that the Granite Advantage program and the Commission on Drug and Alcohol was sort of automatically getting money directly from the liquor fund. We eliminated that and moved those things to Division 3, Health and Human Services budget, where they'll be actually budgeted rather than automatic spending there.
We have some questions.
Okay. Yes.
Just a couple. On the Sununu issues,
Yes.
I would like some information in terms of where we are in that. I understand there's some negotiations going on and that somebody probably is going to buy it, but I don't have any kind of sense.
You're talking about the building,
Yeah.
not the abuse cases.
No, well, they're going to be bad too, but I'm wondering about the property. There.
Okay, the property itself, yes.
So I'm going to talk about the property.
Okay, go ahead.
It's a Division 3 issue.
Okay. I mean, I'm from Manchester, so I know what that property is like and worth, and I'd like to have some information.
The reason it came up in Division 1 is it's possibly going to be transferred to the Department of Administrative Services, and then they would have to maintain it, right? So that's why that was my piece, but apparently the property itself is now part of Health and Human Services, so when we get to that part of the budget, Representative Edwards will talk about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question is, there's eliminate 150 positions at the department. This is corrections.
Corrections. We'll get there.
Well, it reduces the general fund appropriations by 34 million over the biennium. Do we have fewer prisoners? I mean, is it?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's
the short
good
answer is yes, but I'll get to it. We'll get to it.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Representative Colton.
Thank you for the question. On eliminating the Liquor Commission enforcement position, what's the plan for the enforcement and oversight of that to make sure people are following the right rules?
So again, it'll be licensing enforcement the same way that OPLC enforces licensing, right? So OPLC oversees licensing of plumbers and doctors and nurses and electricians and on, right? There's, 70 licensed professions. They don't have any law enforcement there. They have licensing enforcement. And this will be the same thing. The restaurants are licensed and they'll have licensing enforcement, but they don't necessarily need law enforcement in the same way. You see what I mean?
If I could follow up, I would challenge that in that if a doctor or a nurse or somebody doesn't have a license, there's an employer there who's verifying it, so there is a level of checks and balances. where with the Liquor Commission, somebody wants to open up a little cafe and decides they want to start selling liquor there, there is no level of checks and balances or enforcement for that. That's just going to be somebody from the area questioning it?
No, but the licensing enforcement will close such a place.
If I could
Right.
comment further, about 3 years ago, we had a 300-page audit of the Liquor Commission, and it was very strongly criticism of the enforcement branch. There's like 1,400 serving places that serve alcohol. Their job is basically to go around surreptitiously to observe if anybody's being served who's drunk or underage or they're not properly checking IDs. That was their job. It seemed like they wanted to spend all their time out with the regular police doing sobriety checks. And they were ignoring what their job description was because they had a badge. We're cops. So we said, you're not doing what we intended for you to do in the enforcement division. You're out playing cop, which is not your job. So we took it away in the previous budget. We did the same action. It passed the House. It went to the Senate. The Senate put the law enforcement back in, which was not what we thought was a good decision. Then we asked for regular reports from the Liquor Commission. We got them every few months. And I remember one of them was talking about, okay, our enforcement division has saved lives. They were at the scene of an accident where they were the first one there and they saved a life. They were at the scene of another thing and they saved a life. They did this, and this is all I got in the report. It had nothing to do with how many places they had inspected.
Can I just hit one more follow-up then?
Sure.
How about the facilities that sell the alcohol that are not restaurants, so stores, convenience stores, grocery stores, anything like that? Are we checking on that?
So those are all licensed, and they get their supply from the Liquor Commission. So the Liquor Commission sells the liquor, sells the wine, there are beer distributors are separate, but you see what I mean? So the Liquor Commission knows who's getting alcohol and what they're doing, all that stuff. Okay. All right. Next page, page 11 now. Department of Energy. So we had a bill in the House to move all the money from the Renewable Energy Fund back to ratepayers. We rated that fund for the biennium. So for the biennium, that fund will be used to help balance the budget. But after the biennium, it will do what House Bill 504 did, which was put the money back to ratepayers. And we also put in one of the bills, House Bill 219, which has to do with also saving ratepayers some money. Okay.
I have a question on the REF.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Representative Thomas, your gutting or stealing of this money that the ratepayers have paid into with the understanding that it would go to renewable energy initiatives is most probably going to be challenged legally in a lawsuit as soon as this is signed. This is a dedicated fund, and you have essentially stolen the money.
And the question is, I mean, that's your opinion, right? But
it is not my opinion. It is a dedicated fund. It is a legal opinion. I guess my question is, how do you sleep at night gutting New Hampshire's energy future?
Mr. Chair, can we encourage people to use proper decorum in these proceedings?
It's my question. You are gutting New Hampshire's future.
That's an inappropriate question. How do you sleep at night? That is an inappropriate question. You should retract it because it's inappropriate.
I will not retract it. What I don't understand is how you feel comfortable gutting New Hampshire's energy future.
Look, we, as part of this budget, had to find $770 million, right, of both cuts and increases, right, to balance the budget. I mean, that was our task. We had 6 weeks to do it. One of the ways we balance the budget is by looking at dedicated funds and taking money from dedicated funds. All right? It's a source of money, and by law, we created the dedicated funds by law. This particular fund didn't exist until we passed a law to create it. So we can pass a law to change it. I mean, it's not more complicated than that. Yes, right. Question.
Hi. Yeah, I also have a question on the Department of Energy section.
Sure.
The last bullet here is on the renewable portfolio standard, and it's talking about saving ratepayers $5.7 million per year starting in July of 2027, so basically after this biennium's budget. But it actually, what the bill does, what the language in the bill does, is it removes a line item for us to be supporting the solar portion of the renewable portfolio standard. And that line item is where most of the investment in renewable energy is happening on small scale solar. And so what's happening is people are saving money because of that line item, because of the RECs that are funded.
Okay.
So when you remove that, what you do basically is disable people's ability to invest at a reasonable rate of return in that technology. So it's not really a savings.
Okay. So what you're arguing is we shouldn't have passed House Bill 2819.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not relevant, I guess, in my opinion. We passed House Bill 219. It's the House position.
It's the majority's position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the majority is the majority, right?
That's correct.
So it's the position of the House. The House passed it, right? And so we put it in the budget to help us pass it at the end of the day, right? So that's why it's there. We, as Division 1, did not change the language, I don't believe, in House Bill 219. We just included it as part of the budget.
So my question is this part of the budget? Because it says it doesn't start until 2027. So should it be here at all? This $5.7 million is not going to materialize into a reduction in this particular budget,
right.
Correct?
It
what is it doing
involves
there?
money paid by ratepayers. Yes. So it does involve money. Okay.
It involves money, but it says in the bullet that it doesn't come into effect until after this 2-year biennium budget is through.
Yeah.
So is this $5.7 million supposed to
there's-
be here at all?
Part of the budget has to do with long-term financial changes, things that affect the state, like, for example, the Group 2 thing. The Group 2 retirement thing affects the state over 10 years, right? So there are things in the budget that are not just these next 2 years and that's it. There are things that have long-term effects, like the retirement stuff, right? Yes. Can we go on? Your question, sir.
Thanks. Recommendation, I think you need more staff.
I'm sorry, excuse me for a moment. Excuse me. Could we be? Thank you. Go ahead.
You do a lot of hard work, and I get the feeling that you need some staff, and so that a lot of these answers would actually, questions would be answered, and you would have it right, you wouldn't have an argument. Anyway, but that costs some money.
We have fantastic staff.
Okay.
There is no question about it, and we couldn't get what we have to do done in 6 weeks or 6 months if we didn't have the staff that we have. Anyways.
I think you need a few more. Anyway, what is being spent on climate change mitigation? And when you say lapses the renewable energy fund balance to the general fund at the beginning of 2026, how much money is being lapsed from what I think was supposed to be climate change efforts into whatever it is that you think is more important.
So it was
how
a
much
few
money are we
million.
talking about?
I don't think it was that much.
Okay.
It was a few million, is what I remember, but let me see if I have that here. Yeah, this was money that was going to programs like buying people pellet boilers and things, and solar panels and things like that. But I think that once we pay off the committed funds, it wasn't 10 million. That's the way I remember it, but I could be wrong. Yeah, let's see, no, it's not.
Well, it does say something about 5.7 million down at the last bullet, but updates the renewable portfolio standards, RPS, over 5 years, saving ratepayers an estimated 5.7 million. I'm just, where did you get those figures?
You should go to look at House Bill 219 and read the fiscal note. That would be in the fiscal note of that bill.
Okay, so you don't want to answer the question right here.
I don't know that particular detail, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
Just get more staff, I think. It would be helpful.
I need a bigger head, maybe. All right. So the Department of Corrections. All right. So the Department of Corrections is the largest department that we have in Division 1. And so we had to, it's over 300 million in total funds, and almost all of it is general funds. And what we discovered when we looked into the Department of Corrections was that they've been growing their staff over the years in an unreasonable way. So they had 10 years ago, they were in charge of 35% more inmates than they have today. 10 years ago, they had 2,700 inmates. Today, they have under 2,000, around 2,000 inmates. So they had a significantly larger number of inmates 10 years ago, but they had 150 fewer employees than they have today. So the inmates have been going down, and the number of employees has been going up. And so to right-size this department, we have significantly cut the number of employees. We've put in a layoff of 150 employees to get them back to the size that the department was roughly 10 years ago, when even then they had way more inmates. So now we put in these employee reductions in a very specific way because they are shorthanded for corrections officers, right? So we did not reduce the number of corrections officers that are employed. That was maintained, and we maintained open positions and overtime for the corrections officers. But we did lay off, the 150 layoffs are coming in ancillary areas. Teachers, social workers, counselors, all the cooks, other areas that have been bloated over the years. Now, we put in very specific set of cuts, specific sets of positions, but I expect that over time, that the list of positions is not final. We are still getting more information. We're still working on the list. I think it's 90% final, but it's not perfect yet, all right? So I'm still waiting on, I was promised certain information yesterday. I didn't receive it yet, but I'm still getting information. We're still making changes to the specific list, and we'll work together with our counterparts across the wall to make the list correct. But the problems we found in the Department of Corrections are not just our own discovery, but the coach committee has been discovering the same sort of stuff. And so we're getting some input from them as well. Question?
Yes, thank you. Did the committee receive input from the Commissioner of Corrections on these cuts? And if so, what was her position?
The answer is no. And the main issue here is the committee lost confidence in the commissioner. And so we've had to work outside of the commissioner herself, unfortunately. So, okay, let's move on. Judicial Council. So the Judicial Council is the people who provide public defenders for indigent people who are accused of crimes. And we added 3.6 million, I think that's, I don't know if that's 10% maybe. We added money to their budget. They made a convincing case that the governor had simply overlooked certain things in their budget, and we added to that budget. This is, they're traditionally are underfunded, and they come back to the fiscal committee for extra funds over the biennium. We try to fund them a little bit more appropriately. All right, Bureau of Economic Affairs. So we suspended there's a portion of the rooms and meals tax goes to the Department of Travel and Tourism for advertising. That was a cut that we made to help balance the general fund, and it's been done in the past. So, but it's a significant amount of money. We did allocate a little bit more to the Small Business Development Center, and then we also required the Department of Transportation to sell the non-turnpike rest areas and welcome centers, and that will happen in the first year of the biennium, and therefore we removed the positions from those particular welcome centers for the second year of the biennium, which saved the general fund $2.3 million.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. What testimony was heard regarding the suspension of the RSA 12011B? I understand that the governor herself wasn't asking for these cuts, and the $14 million over 2 years is essentially a mortal wound to the Division of Travel and Tourism. With tourism being the second highest revenue generator in this state, accounting for 70,000 jobs, and studies have shown that for every dollar that we invest in tourism, we get a return of $15 spent in this state. So what testimony led to the decision to cut $14 million from this industry? Thank you.
So I dispute this. If we spend $1 here, we get $15, right? Because I mean, are you saying that if I spent $100 million here, I could get $1.5 billion more in rooms and meals tax? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
To answer your question, yes. That's what $15 return on every dollar invested means,
so
yes.
It makes no sense, right? We don't have the idea that somehow every dollar spent by Department of Travel and Tourism becomes $15 worth of rooms and meals tax. I mean, that simply does not make any sense.
That wasn't a question. The question was, what testimony did you hear that led to this recommendation?
We heard from the department, they like this what you just said, right? I mean, they think that this number comes from them, but we don't find it credible. I mean, it's that simple, right? This is a grant type of money. This is money spent on outside agencies. It's not spent on employees of Department of Travel and Tourism. It's spent elsewhere. And we had to find $770 million. This $14 million is a little piece of that, 2%. Okay?
And the information that you used to come up with that insight was guided by what studies that you found or that you came up with? If the studies that prove that for every dollar spent you get 15 in return, is not credible to you. What studies were you referring to that led you to that recommendation?
The most successful tourist businesses are always doing their own advertising. Why are we adding more to it? They seem to be doing fine through the years, and they seem to attract as many people as they want. It's a very seasonal business, and people that come year after year are very aware of it. So you're not bringing in that many new people. You bring in some of the same who come anyway.
But if I may, just one more follow-up. There's been year over year creation of industries, whether it's the North Country, the Seacoast, the Lakes region, the Mountains region. We have multiple seasons worth of recreation that bring in tourism in this country, and creating an effective mortal wound of suspending this outright for 2 years is irresponsible to the second biggest revenue generator in this state. That's why I was looking for your backup to where you came to your conclusion.
This effectively is a form of corporate welfare, right? We're spending money theoretically to benefit one particular industry, right? Do we spend money like this to benefit others, right? I mean,
One thing I've learned is
the
that
industry can spend their own money, right, to do their own advertising, and I think they could do it more effectively because they get feedback, right? They know when they spend money what happens to it. You know, how does it benefit themselves?
Okay, no testimony, no studies. Thank you for your answer.
the surprising thing is that the rooms and meals tax does better when the economy goes down, because the people in the rest of the Northeast that might have gone to Europe for a summer vacation or to the West for skiing will come to New Hampshire because it's cheaper. And it's amazing, I've seen it through the years, that meals and rooms does go up when the rest of the country is not having as successful an economy. So weather and things like that have more to do with it than the advertising.
All right, let's move on. All right. So,
Excuse me?
Yes.
One more question, please.
Yes, Representative Damon.
Rep. Damon, Sullivan County. So I want to agree with the prior questioner, and I'm puzzled that we don't recognize that part of the state's responsibility is economic development, and that is exactly what travel and tourism marketing is. It is a statewide adverse impact that makes no sense whatsoever to me.
Okay.
And secondly, would you please explain about the changes in the allocation of the rooms and meals tax and how that is going to downshift costs to municipalities? Thank you.
So we are keeping it flat. We did not change. I would like to change the distribution of rooms and meals tax so that we target the least property, the most property poor towns more so than the property rich towns. Right now, the rooms and meals tax is strictly per head. So a person, if your population in Newcastle is 1,000 people, you'll get $100,000. If your population in some other poorer place is 1,000 people, you'll get $100,000, okay? I think that's wrong, but I lost that argument in committee. So we are keeping the distribution method per head the same, but we're keeping the distribution amount the same as this year, fiscal year 25. And so it's $137 million, the most ever given out, I'll say, flat for the biennium. House Ways and Means thinks that rooms and meals revenue will be increasing, and therefore towns might not get what they would get if it's 30%, right? So if House Ways and Means is correct and rooms and meals tax does increase, then there's sort of a foregone amount of payments to municipalities. But it's a very minor amount. The amount we're recognizing in the budget is maybe $11 million for the biennium when we're talking about a $270 million item, right? So it's a very small amount of money. Okay. Next part here. Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So we had a little bit of a back of the budget cut, $600,000. We eliminated the division of the arts, $3.8 million, and we added House Bill 572, which has something specific to do with housing. Okay. Yes, question.
Representative Gilman, Exeter. We've heard that our second highest income or economic support is from travel and tourism. And the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources is part of that income for businesses and actually for the state parks, et cetera. And so the cut to that and eliminating the division of arts is going to have an impact on local revenues. So that will have an impact on whether or not people can stay in New Hampshire or even come visit New Hampshire. In Exeter, we have Independence Festival every July. People come from all over the country. We've had 10,000 people there one year, and we get a tiny, tiny piece of the New Hampshire Council on the Arts grant. And if we have that support shown in our community, then why are we taking just a little bit that we can share with other communities? And also, you're reducing the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and then giving them more work to do with the Champions and Housing Fund, which I think belongs under the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. So I guess my question, I have a question. Why is the Housing Fund not in the appropriate place? And why do you not support local communities earning or keeping their businesses alive with the Department of Cultural Resources? Thank you.
I've just been told that there's a typo on page 12 in this Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. The database is Department of Business and Economic Affairs. So that should be, the last word in that section should be BEA. Okay, where's the database is. Anyways. So page 12, look at Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, third bullet item. The last bit of that said Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. That should be Bureau of Business and Economic Affairs, BEA, right? So it's just a little typo, that's all. Okay.
I wanted to comment on the arts funds. Obviously, the state isn't providing all the funds for all these various museums and arts and art functions. They're also having to raise their own funds. Now, I visited the Brook last Saturday. I was amazed how much that's grown. The parking lot probably had 600 cars. And I asked them about charitable funding. And obviously, if we're going to increase revenue in lottery, it will increase charitable funding. And they told me that they had a person that interviewed to see how important a charity was, how worthy it was. There were some that they gave the full 10 days that any charity is allowed per year to have a charitable fundraiser that uses gambling. And for some of the ones, like they mentioned Angel Flight, they thought that was important. It's national, has to raise a lot of money. They gave them a full 10 days. They raised almost $200,000 for that charity. They had some others that were given fewer days because there were so many, and some of them were just local charities, so they're already doing some. They may get 3 days, and they may only get it every other year. So that's a place to go, and it will be having more money in future, and a lot of these places can go out and try to raise their own funds. And some of these charitable gaming is quite a good deal for some of these charities. I was in part of some that, you know, they had their days and they got $30,000. That was the easiest money they ever raised just by getting on that. So I'm expecting an increase in that, and it might be a worthy place for some of these art functions to go, because they're already in fundraising mode, and so alternative places are available. Thank you.
Okay, we have our last department, thankfully, in Division 1, Department of Environmental Services. We did a number of changes in this department. They collect a large number of different fees. We increased a number of those fees. We also made the solid waste area self-supporting. So we added a tipping fee for solid waste and included in it repayments to municipalities for their tipping. So that ended up taking that area off the books in a sense, or putting it into other funds. And we also collected some unused state aid grants in this area, and we gave them a bit of a back of the budget cut for their general funds, although it still looks like they'll still be getting an increase in general funds compared to the current budget. And that's it for Division 1.
Thank you.
Yes, a question over here.
Thank you. Now that you're finished, can we go back to the Office of the Child Advocate, please?
Okay.
And it says it was $2.2 million over the biennium to save, and I'm assuming that's in salaries for the staff of the office?
Yes. And, you know, some travel and other things.
Pardon me?
Some travel and
Okay, office expenses, staff, all right. It's my understanding that that's an office that kind of works as an intermediary first step before involving DCYF, and also works on some of the complaints from DCYF. And I wonder who would handle those, and if that if that's an unknown and assigned a monetary value that we would get from this office.
Yes, thank you for the question. So this is, a lot of what they do is sort of internal lobbying of the legislature, right? They get involved in legislative activities related to child welfare, and there's plenty of others who have child welfare in mind. Parents, foster parents, teachers, et cetera, plenty of other outside groups. So that aspect of it, not necessary. The Department of DCYF has also their own internal complaints and all that sort of thing. So again, this seemed duplicative to us, right? To have, if there are problems in DCYF, then we need to fix DCYF rather than implement a separate agency to somehow jawbone DCYF, because they have no control, they have no authority over DCYF, if you see what I mean. So we tried to eliminate, or what fell by the wayside was duplicative efforts, and this seemed to be one.
If I just ask a quick follow-up, is that not maybe premature? Would you have a process in hand before you cut that office?
Well, again, within DCYF, there are complaints and ombudsmen and other avenues for specific cases.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Representative Orrs.
I think it's still morning. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank the Finance Committee for doing a fantastic job, whether you agree with them or not. I get up every morning, I go outside, get on my knees, and thank the Lord I am not on finance. For those of us that are on Ways and Means, there are some concerns mentioned, and I wait to the end about tariffs. If you look at the stock market over the years, unlike school enrollment, the stock market goes like that, school enrollment goes like that. You don't have to worry about tariffs in the stock market. First of all, you have the world's greatest negotiator negotiating this stuff. I know some of you
is there a
made the-
question?
Yeah,
Question?
let's make this relevant because we need to move on.
Okay, so I guess the question is, if you have questions about tariffs in the stock market, and if you are concerned about Taiwan, Israel, and there's one other, Vietnam, already given up their tariffs and are going along with the Trump plan, please come see me and I will answer your questions on why you can sleep at night. Thank you.
Was that like advertising? I don't know. All right, thank you. I'll allow Representative Irf to continue.
Great. Thank you, Representative McGuire.
Oh, all right. I guess
sorry.
I'm still on.
Oh, I
Go ahead.
apologize.
Representative Murphy.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to, in Ways and Means, we heard testimony yesterday about the impact of completely eliminating tourism because the Senate is working on the similar budget. And I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact there are a number of studies out there that show, there are case studies of other states that have done this with devastating effects. And so I'll forward this information to you. That being said, and the arts are related, as someone else pointed out, like, we have a very robust New Hampshire craftsman, Monadnock has a lot of artists in the region, and they are part of the attraction to the state. And when people go to plays, they eat out. So it is definitely, a revenue generator for the state. So my question is, if we do this, and I hope somebody's tracking like the effect of this on revenue, how fast can we pivot and restore these funds if necessary, if we see that it's devastating our tourism and art communities?
Well, in general, let me say something general about the budget. So the budget is a point in time. It's our best guess on July 1st of odd-numbered years what we're going to spend and what we're going to take in revenue for the next 2 years. But there are in-course corrections done mostly by the fiscal committee, but also by Governor and Council to some extent, over the next 2 years, okay? So they are authorized to make changes during that period of time. And I'll say one particular thing. The governor is, when revenue does not meet expenses, like it is not in this year, fiscal year 25, the governor is required to make, and has the authority to make changes, to make cuts, to stop making grants, to make layoffs, and so on, all right? And so part of our problem in this budget is we expect fiscal year 25, the current year, to come in $150 million short, okay? We expect to end the biennium $150 million short. So not only do we have to make next biennium meet its goals, but unless we want to drain the rainy day fund, we have to come up with that $150 million for the current biennium. So we have to make serious cuts. And this money that has not yet been spent on advertising that businesses can, and they have organizations and associations and so on. They can do their own advertising, right? Why do they need the state to make the decisions on advertising for businesses when they themselves know what they need, right? So this, to me, is not one of the difficult cuts. The difficult cuts come in Division 3, as far as I'm concerned, okay? Because those are programs specifically for the poor and the disabled and all that sort of stuff. We're talking here about money spent to benefit business, right? Okay. Representative.
Herbert, out of Manchester. I agree with you, by the way.
Thank you.
The fact of the matter is, we need, we have a bias in this state. We're very frugal, almost to a fault. And the fact of the matter is, I think we need a little balancing going on where spending might be the better answer to solve a problem than cutting somewhere else. Just a point of view. But the point I'm trying to make is that I have philosophically, my interest is to help young people and their children and old people at the end of life.
Yeah, adjust the microphone. There you go.
That's my philosophy. The young families that are having difficulties and the education that's needed there, to me, is number one priority, not a tax cut. But and on the other side, the elderly, which I am part of, God bless, for a long time, I hope, and to help those people also. And there's a lot in the middle that we can do. But youth and old age are the most, in danger, and that's always the way. You do a great job.
What's that?
You do a great job. I would hate being on your committee. But the fact of the matter is, I think spending sometimes gets kicked out the front door when actually it's the answer.
Okay. Well, I can tell you we are still spending $15 billion over the biennium. Okay?
Yeah.
The cuts I've talked about are in the, 500 million sort of range, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about, 3%, 4%, 5%, something like that, right? So if you yourself have a shortage of income and you have to make cuts in your own budget of 4%, 5%, whatever, I hope it's not the end of the world for you, and it won't be the end of the world for the state.
This state is not poor. And the fact of the matter is, to spend money, to raise money in order to help those who need help, I think is where we fall short. And that's $15 billion, fine. And if the fact of the matter is, somebody says, well, we have a surplus of $250,000, I say, that's not a surplus, dude. That's, you don't have enough money in the bank for a $15 billion deal. So I'm saying, don't forget there is spending and there is raising revenues. I know it's painful, but sometimes that's what you have to do.
Thank you. All right, I guess that was a statement. Representative Earth.
Thank you. So I'm Division 2, and I'm going to try to provide an overview of the division and the problems we faced and how we went about solving them. So I would ask that you please hold your questions until I'm finished. So unlike other divisions, we work with a number of funds, including, in addition to general funds, education trust funds, and federal funds, we also look at highway funds and fish and game funds and turnpike funds. Turnpike funds are monies collected on the toll roads in New Hampshire and are dedicated to their maintenance. We've made no changes in the budget related to turnpike funds. Highway funds support many agencies within the Department of Safety and the Department of Transportation. The Highway Fund is intended to be self-funding and has been running a deficit recently and is expected to continue to do so in this fashion in the next biennium, barring any changes. Running a deficit means using general funds. And in the current environment, these funds are needed to fund all the other parts of government. A goal of our division is to erase this deficit to free up general funds. The highway fund revenue comes from the gas tax, known as the road toll in statute, and from fees for licenses and registrations. While increasing the gas tax is unpopular, it also fails to extract fees from all users of our highways, as many of the cars on the road no longer use gas. This leaves increasing fees to accomplish the goal of associating user usage with the maintenance of our highways. We looked to the department for suggestions and learned that most fees haven't been raised in over 20 years. And those that have been raised more recently haven't been raised in over 10 years. It seemed this is a good place to find the balance of associating fees with use. We increased a number of licensing and registration fees to raise an estimated $45 million over the biennium. Doing this allows the highway fund to run at a surplus over the biennium, and this should continue into the future. It also enabled us to fund priority needs of the department for winter snow plowing and incentive payments for plow drivers. The department is regularly coming to the fiscal committee for additional snow removal funds, as at our recent meeting. The incentive payments are necessary as it has been difficult to hire plow drivers in recent years. We also increased vanity license plate fees, which generates additional revenue to the general fund. This allowed us to provide support to the state radio communication system with general funds, which has historically been supported solely by E91 system funds. These are the funds that are the bill that shows up on your telephone bill. And they should not be solely supporting the state radio system. The Fish and Game Fund is another of the special funds whose resources are dedicated to the Fish and Game Department. Here again, this fund has been running at a deficit and would be continuing to do so. It also is intended to be self-sustaining, but is requiring general funds to make up the deficit. The department suggested we not raise the license fees associated with hunting, fishing, or snowmobiles, as these impact tourism while we are competing with neighboring states. The department has a number of dedicated funds and suggested we raise fees associated with these funds and use the funds raised for the Fish and Game Fund. The suggestion was to look at the wildlife habitat and fisheries habitat fees. We recently learned that the fisheries habitat fee is associated with a fishing license. Here again, the intent is to associate the usage of the Fish and Game Department resources with the fees that support it. We also moved balances of these two funds and the game management account that exceed $750,000 to the Fish and Game Fund at the end of each fiscal year. These changes allowed the Fish and Game Fund to run at surplus and not require general funds during this biennium, and should continue to do so into the future. This also allowed us to satisfy requests for some priority needs of the department. We modified the governor's slot machine plan. The House plan assumes an estimated $160 million increase over the biennium. I'll discuss these funds in more detail shortly. We now move into education areas supported by general funds. While we didn't look to the University System of New Hampshire as the first place to reduce general funds when we reached the end of the process and recognized we still needed further reductions in this area, we reduced the funds associated to USNH by $25 million per year, in addition to the governor's request. While this is not an insubstantial sum, the contribution of New Hampshire is only one part of their overall budget. The Community College System of New Hampshire is also supported by general funds. We flat funded CCSNH at the same level as the current biennium. This includes maintaining the dual and concurrent enrollment program, allowing high school students in grades 10 to 12 to take college courses at no cost. We also continued the Math Learning Communities program. The Department of Education is funded by general funds, education trust funds, and restricted lottery revenue. The New Hampshire Constitution requires that lottery funds be dedicated only to local, district, public schools. Since its creation, there hasn't been a clear distinction in the Education Trust Fund related to the lottery funds. Division 2 created restricted lottery revenue. This isn't new money, and it doesn't diminish the funding available to the Education Trust Fund. It only makes clear that these funds are only distributed to cover state adequacy grants to local, district, public schools. The other change we made to appropriations from the Education Trust Fund can be seen in Table 2, which I believe is on your page 718 of the handout. The appropriations on lines 7 to 15, I'll give you a chance to all get there. The appropriations on lines 7 to 15, which I believe are indicated with a little superscript, 1, and in one case a 2, have been moved from the Education Trust Fund to the General Fund. This is done to match the historical use of the Education Trust Fund, which is to fund adequate education, otherwise known as the state adequacy grants seen on line 3 back in Table 1 on the prior page. I'll let you take a moment to glance back at that. A corresponding adjustment is made to the tax revenues that are directed to the Education Trust Fund to align them with the appropriations that are now left in the fund. This is sound fiscal management, as the Education Trust Funds can't be used for general purposes. In the current biennium, the Education Trust Fund built up a large surplus, which wasn't needed to fund education. It doesn't make sense to tie up these funds when the state has other needs. The general fund is where the legislature can turn to satisfy the needs of the state as they arise. The largest appropriation for K-12 education is the state adequacy grants, over $1 billion per year. This is per pupil funding and is referred to as the adequacy formula, which determines the grant made to each local school district, each charter school, each participant in the Education Freedom Account program, and each homeschooler who elects to be in the Adequate Education Grant program. We made no changes to the grant in FY26, the first year of the next biennium. We made one significant change in the per pupil grant by increasing per pupil special education aid by $1,040, which has an estimated total impact of $28 million in fiscal year 27, the second year of the biennium. The other change is to add fiscal capacity disparity aid back into the formula. This provides additional grants to communities with low equalized valuation per pupil that don't also have a high number of free and reduced lunch students. These communities were harmed in the current budget, where all non-per-pupil aid is encapsulated in the new Extraordinary Needs Grant, which is based on low equalized valuation per pupil in combination with the number of free and reduced lunch students. This had an outsized effect on cities. Manchester in particular saw their grant increase by over $30 million, a 36% increase in FY24, the first year of the new budget, of that new budget, and a projected 49% increase, or $42 million in FY27. This extraordinary needs grant is now capped for large districts, having the effect of limiting Manchester's increase in FY27 to a $30 million increase. The net impact of adding the fiscal capacity disparity aid and limiting the extraordinary needs grant is no spending increase. The other change to K through 12 funding relates to special education aid or catastrophic aid to towns with unusually large education costs. The amounts budgeted for this purpose are seen on line 7 of Table 2. They're about $100 million for the biennium. And that money was budgeted by the governor. If the total excess special education costs across all school districts exceeds the total budgeted amount in a year, then the proration rate will be no less than 80% of the eligible costs. That was added in our division, also in the Education Funding Committee. So that ends my overview. I'm glad to have you all come on up and hit me. And ask questions, yes, not actually hit me. And this is my vice chair, Daniel Popovich-Muller, who will also help address any questions you have.
Thank you for taking my question. It has to do with funding for the university system of New Hampshire in this division. We're currently, and have been for a very, very long time, among the lowest, I think the least funding for public higher education in the country. We could double that, we'd still be last. We've had tuition freezes at our colleges and universities, public colleges and universities, for several years. So what I'm wondering is, did the committee do any work to study how the 30% or so cut to USNH is going to add to the cost of tuition for New Hampshire students, college students, who currently have one of the highest debt loads already in the country? So this looks like a savings, but it's passing on a bill to people who are already footing very, very high bills for what is supposed to be one of the foundational services that a state should provide for its citizens.
Thank you. So obviously we did spend a lot of time talking to the university system of New Hampshire. We spent a lot of time working in our committee to try to avoid the need for such cuts. At the end of the day, they were necessary to balance the state budget overall and to make it fiscally responsible. You said a 30% cut. As it happens, that seems to come from the assumption that the entire university is funded from the $95 million that we used to send them the previous budget cycle. And if you look up their annual report for 2024, which is on their website, even though their budget is not on their website, but their annual report is, their total revenues on a yearly basis during that year were $1.187 billion, which makes the $25 million cut, which is a painful cut regardless, to be about 2.1% of their overall revenues. I would say that's quite different from the 30%, oh my God, I'm losing an arm and a leg, and so on and so forth. So it is an unpleasant cut, but it is much, the university is in much better shape to handle it than you'd think based on the rhetoric heard in our committee. Thank you.
Well, but if I may, right, that $95 million you referred to, right, that's up about $4 million from previous funding. It was around $90 to $91 million. So if it's a little bit less than 30%, we can split those hairs. But the fact of the matter is our university system, particularly our state colleges, have already been cut to the bone. One of our state colleges is going to have a significantly difficult time surviving these cuts because they're already in a situation which is really precarious because we are the cheapest state in the country in terms of actually funding these things. So we can quibble over how that hair is split, but when you've already been cut to the bone, whatever you want to call it, 20, 25, 30% is potentially lethal.
Thank you. Oh, whoop. Thank you. I will just, again, remind you that a 27.4 cut from the state aid is about a 2.1 reduction in their overall revenues. Thank you.
Representative Horry. Oh, I'm Representative Timothy Horry from Durham. It's also a college town like Keene. So certainly this cut, it's only 2%, but they're already struggling a lot of other ways, and so this isn't good for our town. Which, by the way, brings in a lot of people, a lot of money from out of state. So just as the refusal to raise hunting license fees is probably justifiable to bring in hunters from other states, or that this brings in a lot of revenue from other states, but. I would, but there is one thing I would like to ask. This is from something came out of the Finance Committee as they were during the hearing. They were criticizing Southern New Hampshire University's policies, which is a private institution. So I hope probably maybe in the future you'll at least interfere less with the UNH and Keene State and Plymouth State in their efforts to decide how to operate their own operations, since it's already a very small percentage. So I hope in the future you'll at least consider backing off from like criticizing how they do things. I mean, anyway, so but I do feel this is a significant cut, and it also shows perhaps a lack of support, at least from some state governments. So I think it's not quite as minimal as you think, although they'll find ways to cope. So I think that was a unwise cut. But also finally, on a totally unrelated note, I'd like to thank you. Raising all those fees, it's painful, but at least I'm a member of the minority party. I'm a Democrat, obviously from Durham, so we're not taking the hit from it. Americans for Prosperity has already endorsed this budget, so you don't have to worry about press conferences, press releases saying you raised whatever it is, 474 fees, many of which are Division 2. So I'd like to thank you for not making us take the hit for it. So thanks.
Thank you for your comment, Representative Ors.
Yes, thank you, Representative Sir Ors Chichester. I'm curious as to why, with all the funding cuts we've had to make, we haven't taken the lottery commissioner's advice and gone with 45% versus 30% in what the casinos, et cetera, are paying out? And I have a follow-up.
I will be happy to defer to Representative Sweeney if he'd rather take it. I can also address.
Thank you, Representative, for your question. Thank you for your service on Ways and Means. So there was a belief at the beginning that there was a transition forced in law from historic horse racing machines to the video lottery terminals. There was nothing in the budget that repealed historic horse racing machines. So the operators are able to keep historic horse racing machines at a 25% tax rate, and some of the larger ones have a 5% totalizer that brings their overall operator cost to around 30% per machine. In speaking with the operators, there would be no market transition to machines if the tax rate were even as compared to the governors. Even if we brought the tax rate down to 33%, they wouldn't transition from historic horse racing machines to the video lottery terminals. So we put in at a 30% rate because then we could actually visualize the number of machines of video lottery terminals that we would see the operators transition to over the course of the budget. So in the first year of the budget, they would transition statewide. We'll probably have around 4,000 machines by the end of this year. 2,500 of them would be transitioned on average to VLTs over the course of the first year, 1,500 HHR. Second year of the budget, we'd probably be down to 500 HHR and about, I think it was 4,000 or 4,500 VLTs. We don't see that sort of market direction if the tax was higher than 30% for the projection. So if we were to increase the tax, on paper, the math might look right, but in actuality, they wouldn't switch over to VLTs. They would keep the HHR machines, and we'd get less revenue on the HHR machines and they produce less. So that's why the 30%, in talking with the operators and the stakeholders, the 30% for the House position was the one that we could actually actualize returns and revenue from the new machines while guiding that market-based transition, because there was no mechanism in the budget to repeal HHR and force them all to take on VLTs.
Thank you for your excellent answer. I'll waive off my second question because you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. As the father of 3 children, 2 of whom have completed college, and 1 of whom, the oldest, is a UNH grad, class of 2021, I just want to give you the perspective and lodge a big protest against something like the 30% cut to the university system. That is not how New Hampshire should be looking at its university system as a place when every 2 years when we review the budget, we can look to the university system as a place that could take something like a 30% cut. When kids and families are looking at their college options, the University of New Hampshire ought to be a high option on their list. But when they look at UNH, and as an earlier speaker mentioned, one of the lowest funded, least supported systems in the entire country, and they look and compare UNH's in-state tuition rate to other colleges' out-of-state rates, and they're similar, it contributes to an exodus of talented kids from New Hampshire to other states' universities. And as we know, if a kid leaves New Hampshire for college, a significant fraction of them are gonna, maybe never return. And it's contributing to the brain drain and the loss of youth and young families in New Hampshire. So I just encourage you to stop looking at the university system in the way that you're doing it.
Thank you so much. For the record, this is the first time since 2011 then when that allocation has been reduced. We explained why. I do appreciate the concern about losing people who live in state, but I will say that on the net we are having quite a significant amount of population growth from people migrating in. So at the end of the day, it seems that we are one of the most attractive states in the country in terms of attracting residents, and I believe that will continue. Thank you. Do you mind if we alternate sides? Thank you.
Linda Haskins, Exeter. I'd like to address my question to Rep. Sweeney, if I could. So I'd like to ask you whether you see a thread that I see through these cuts. I serve on the New Hampshire Council for Problem Gambling, and my avocation is working with addicted loved ones. So if we go back to the Department of Corrections, for instance, the social worker that I met with at the Brentwood Jail told me about the programs they have to try and reduce recidivism. And they get more help in the jail than they get outside the jail. So I think teachers, social workers, whatever, within the correctional system are working on the issue of addiction. Now we fast forward to having slot machines and increasing the revenues that we're going to receive from gambling, and I wonder if you consider problem gambling an addiction.
I thank you for the question. Obviously, people can get addicted to gambling as they can get addicted to any vice. Under the budget allocation, 0.25% of the revenues collected goes towards problem gaming services, which is going to amount to around $300,000 a year. The Lottery Commission is going to partner with DHHS on running the program for problem gaming from the state of New Hampshire. So we do recognize in the budget that there are folks that do have issues with gaming, and we're putting resources aside for those folks.
I'm aware and I recognize that if we increase problem gambling, we'll get more money for charitable gaming. I wonder if that, for charities, by law, that they have to give the money to, and I wonder if you're okay with that ratio, that causality. Let's increase the amount of revenue for the state from gaming because the charities will get 10% of it. Is that a good reason?
Well, the charities, of the tax collected on the machines, the charities are getting 35% of the revenue. The state gets 65% of the revenue. But of that, still 0.25% goes to problem gaming, and then so 64.75% of the funds collected goes towards education purposes.
I guess I'm concerned that the state of New Hampshire is raising revenue increasingly from the so-called sin taxes, and I'm not sure that's a way that we should go.
I appreciate your opinion on it, and we're just differing minds on it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sally Fellows. My question is about funding of the university system. So yesterday I looked up on the U.S. Department of Education's website the enrollment in both the university system and the community college system. And what I found was that the full-time equivalent measured enrollment for the university system is 3 times that of the community college system. Yet in the budget, you have them funded at approximately the same level. So what that means is that the university system on a per student basis, full-time equivalent basis, you're funding at $9,500, and the university system less than $3,000 per student. So I'm wondering what information you had, statistics you had, that made you think that that was a reasonable allocation for the university system?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So I think one of the problems, and I've said that when I presented this, when we presented in full finance committee, is that every agency that we give money to, even though the funds may be just part of their budget or they are self-funded, has to present the full budget. The university hasn't done that in the past, and that seems to lead a lot of people to making assumptions about their finances that are simply not consistent with the facts. So to answer your question briefly, because we could dive in for hours if we really went into the budget, the university system of New Hampshire has significantly different revenue sources than CCSNH. Both of them need to be funded to the level that allows them to do their job of educating their very different student populations appropriately. And I believe that we have been historically doing that, and we will continue to do that in a very appropriate way. But one of the changes that I'd like to make, to suggest for next year, is to have the university system and CCSNH do full budget presentations and publish their full budgets as part of our documents, because it seems that a lot of these percentages flown in, oh my God, 30%, completely ignore the rest of their budget. And that's just simply not an appropriate way to look at a budget, to look at something that's literally less than 10% of their overall budget and infer from it what happens to the rest of the budget. So go ahead. I noticed that you have a follow-up, please.
So I know I absolutely agree that their structure is different, and the university system has elements that are beyond just teaching in the classroom. But both of them receive additional revenues from outside sources. And what we're talking about here is what is the state's obligation to fund higher education at our public institutions in New Hampshire. So why do you have this difference between the two?
Thank you for essentially asking your question again. So I will repeat the answer, which is that when looking at the different sources of funds, those are the appropriate levels. And look, I would be happy at some point when time allows to just go and, have a lunch and go over the numbers in more detail. I'd be happy to do that with anybody. And seriously, I do believe that we will end up doing the full budget presentations in the following years because this seems to be the source of a lot of the confusion here. So since there is nobody here, please, Representative, go ahead.
Dave Luno, Hopkinton and Bow. I just want to say that I'm really glad to see that the budget reintroduces fiscal capacity disparity aid. It's something that we did back in 2019 and 2020. However, the way it's done in the budget is it touches only about 40 different towns across the state. And there's closer to 100 towns that fall into the category, I think as Representative Erf explained, have lower than average property value per pupil, which is used to support public schools. And I'm wondering if the committee looked at ways to expand this so that we can really make sure that that the grants are going to where they're needed across the state.
Well, like with any budget, we looked at every question, and that at the end of the day, this is what we were able to do in this tough budget cycle. I'm glad that you appreciate the fact that we are trying to fine-tune the education formula to look at the interests of every community in the state the best way we can. This is as far as we could go with what we had available, and what happens in the next budget will depend on what the circumstances are for that budget. But, we are trying to address through the various parts of the formula the needs of, every community the best way we can. So.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll be able to help you find some more money later this week. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Rita Matson, Dublin. I live on a dead-end dirt road. I drive a truck. I have 3 neighbors. They all have electric vehicles. The damage done by the tiny profile tires compared to my truck is a lot more. And I'm just wondering if the state has another avenue to raise more money for the electric vehicle fees than through, well, they can't do gas tax because they don't use tax, but I think that the vehicles need to pay more than $100 a year for the upkeep of our state roads. So I was just wondering if there was an avenue to raise more money for the electrical vehicles.
So on one hand, we already increased the registration fees, which apply to every car the same way, based on the car value. So that's neutral to the type of fuel. The Finance Committee can only do so much. At the end of the day, this becomes a policy committee question in terms of how do we best pay for those, for the people who use our roads and how we get the funds to maintain our roads. It is a very complex topic, and I would definitely expect more legislation to come in through the policy committee that hopefully will find the right balance. Not being on that policy committee and just seeing this from the finance, I don't want to start talking about policy because I would be stepping on a lot of toes and not be really qualified to do that. So we've done the best we could there. Well, again, how it is raised is very tricky because you have to be fair and balanced, right? And we don't want to force regular fuel vehicles to subsidize electric cars, but we also don't want to force electric vehicles to subsidize the others. So it's how you do it. Again, it comes back to policy passed through the policy committee and then visiting the finance. Right now, this is more of a policy question.
Right. Well, I'm just saying that, I know I pay a lot more than $100 a year in gas tax, so.
And understood, and it is a known issue that needs to be addressed. Please, go ahead.
Tracy Berkey, Pennacook. So my question is on line 5 in table 2, the education freedom accounts. That, as you know, was talked about in my committee. And I am wondering why in fiscal year 2027, you chose to say that it was going to be $55 million when the fiscal note called for $110 million, and why you chose to ignore the research that was done on that.
So you're probably familiar with the article, or actually the study that Josiah Bartlett did, and it's based on that this calculation was put forth.
So you didn't believe the legislative budget system?
I thought this was a better analysis, yes.
Thank you.
Connie Lane from Concord. On the EFA question, since everyone's been talking about we only looked at something that was absolutely necessary, I would like to hear why increasing EFAs when our public schools are suffering is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. To make a long story short, education programs for minors in this state should not be means tested. We don't do that for public schools. There is no good policy reason to do this for the EFA program, which also, allocates funds to educate those kids. If you look at the Claremont decision saying that we have an obligation to provide adequate funding for education, that did not seem to say anything, that it only applies to people who have a certain income. So it is important to also recognize that when this legislation was originally introduced, there was no income cap. The original income caps were introduced as a compromise in passing it, so the original intent was not to have this means tested to start with.
I guess I would question that it's for public education, and I would question why EFAs are absolutely necessary if they are only going to higher income people who already had children, and that seems to be the vast amount of them, rather than the poor towns. That's a horrible term to use, but the towns with less value are suffering, really suffering, and I would suggest perhaps more than those who can afford to send their children to private school, and that we should focus our tax dollars on the people who need it the most. And then if we have leftover or we come into more flush times, address the people who are capable and are like myself. If I had wanted to send my child to a private school, I would have been financially capable of doing so. Not everyone is that lucky, and I would suggest our state budget focus on those that are less lucky than perhaps the people who already have children in private school and are taking public funds for private schools.
I can assure you that most of the funds we send to education go towards those people you designate, and making funds equally available for everybody is a matter of equity and equal treatment under the law, right? We already are favoring the towns who have, if you are looking at education formula, you can see the significant amounts of additional school finance support that is going to the districts that have lower property valuations, more kids with, who qualify for free and reduced lunches and so on and so forth. Obviously, you are focusing on a smaller part of the budget because you don't feel that you personally, that you can justify that. But in the big scheme of things, this is not, a huge amount compared with the rest of the budget. And again, it's there to address the need to provide an adequate education to everyone.
I guess I am tired of hearing that it's compared to so-and-so, it's a small amount. If we focus on priority things like education, and I came up and asked a question about Medicaid that was not answered, we are not focusing on the things that people most need and what people are asking for. And
I appreciate your comment, but
and we can just agree to disagree. Okay.
That's the plan. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I guess. I'm Jim Gruber, representative from Alstead. The previous two speakers talked about the same issues I wish to bring up, which is the issue of public or education funding. And cutting our universities, as you have proposed here, is a serious impact for the future of our state. and the quality of educated people to do the work that we need to have done here. My question has to do first with the private funding, private schools. I understand and I really appreciate your work working with a tight ear and a tight budget. But increasing a program that primarily will benefit those who are already in private schools to extend with no limit how much the parents can earn to continue funding even more students in private schools seems to be in contrast with the needs of trying to make this budget work in a very tight year. Could you explain to me how you can balance the issue of expanding a program without any income limits to private, wealthier people in private schools at the same time as cutting the University of New Hampshire, as well as cutting other areas which we all know are important, but we have to balance the budget?
Thank you, but this question is essentially the same question we've already answered, right? Why we allocated some additional funds to it. I really don't have anything I can add to that other than repeating my previous statement, so I'm just going to refer to them and, you know.
Okay. Then my last question is the recently passed policy that's included in issues that relates to public school funding. You indicated, I think last week before you passed a policy within the budget that if a public school or even public organizations spend any money on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the state has authority to cut the state funding to those schools. Is that true? And if it is, how do you justify that as part of the budget?
I'm sure that, plenty of people watched the last Finance Committee meeting when this policy was introduced. And yes, since diversity, equity, and, DEI, let's go to the initials to save time today. DEI essentially includes elements of racial discrimination for the purposes of achieving a specific demographic outcome. That is in violation of our discrimination laws, and we do not want to see such policies, being adopted in our education system. And very bluntly, again, decisions should be made based on merit, not based on, those protected characteristics. People should be treated equally under the law, and this is what this requires.
Well, thank you very much.
Wayne Burton, Durham. Last night, the Durham Town Council, which I'm a member for the last 11 years, discussed this reduction in the university's budget. I admit that I am a graduate of UNH master's program, and I have 4 other degrees in my 5-member family. I find this reduction disrespectful. Last night, the Durham Town Council passed a resolution that you will get today. I won't read you the whole thing, but I think a few of these remarks should resonate with all of you. It starts with the town of Durham proudly and productively hosts the University of New Hampshire, the University System of New Hampshire flagship campus, benefiting significantly from the cultural, scientific, and athletic activities that enliven and enrich our town and others on the seacoast and the state and beyond. House Bill 1 increases Governor Ayotte's proposed 4% reduction to USNH for the 26-27 years to a minus 30.5%, causing New Hampshire's flagship and other institutions to scale back activities while maintaining the high quality for which they are known. The steep reduction in funding makes challenging USNH's key role in attracting, educating, and retaining the well-educated professional cohorts of teachers, nurses, and allied healthcare workers, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, business leaders, agricultural experts, and others who will keep New Hampshire more than competitive with the other states. And whereas restricting resources makes little sense, it's about our flagship campus. Business New Hampshire magazine, in their 11/21/24 issue, includes an article entitled UNH is on the edge of becoming a manufacturing hub. The potential for producing many jobs and technology breakthroughs through the creation of the Innovation Center on the West Edge, added to the wildly successful John Olson Advanced Manufacturing Center that provides hands-on interdisciplinary learning opportunities to students, portends successful careers for UNH graduates and highly desired employees for New Hampshire's 21st century business. And whereas the University of New Hampshire's Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics continues to climb in national rankings, rising 5 spots to number 58 in the 2005 Best Undergraduate Business Schools rankings, and stands as the highest ranking public business school in New England for academic experience and career outcomes, and you're going to cut their budget. Whereas USNH fully acknowledges the challenge to produce...
Is there a question? This is a statement. We're supposed to be asking and answering questions. Do you have a question?
Did you know, sir, that USNH fully acknowledges the challenge, has already reduced staff, has already reduced benefits?
Yes. Next question?
Yes.
If I may.
I have
wrap it up quickly, please.
I have no more questions. I just had to ask you, before you take this action to cut one of the best state universities in the country, that you look at the resolution that we sent you and what it would mean to the state and the signal to the state if you are disrespectfully cut $50 million out of their budget. Thank you very much. By the way, your statistics are a little off because in the $1 billion is lots of revenue that's already targeted. It comes from auxiliary services, comes from grants and contracts, and other places that's not used for general purposes. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I will briefly say that no statistics are off, since I'm quoting them directly from the university annual report that everybody can find on their website, and I specifically define what I'm quoting. And second, I can assure you that we are deeply, deeply aware of both the importance of the university to the state as a whole and the importance of the university to Durham in particular, and that your town will continue to benefit from the money coming from the entire rest of the state to fund UNH for a long, long time to go. We have been looking at all those. We spend months and years looking at them. I can assure you that none of this is new to us. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Representative Freeman, Tilton, Sandwichton, and Belmont. I'm curious, since most of you sitting on this finance committee were here the last budget cycle, were there any increases to the university system then?
While I cannot remember the exact amount, yes, we did increase funding for them consistently over time, including during the last cycle, and this time we just...
So I'll just add a tidbit. It was actually 12.5%. So the last budget cycle, we did in fact increase the university system's budget.
Yeah, thank you. The last time it was cut was in 2011, and we've been working to restore it. Go ahead, Mr.
Actually, if I could, Mr. Chair, interject, to add to that, Representative Freeman, in the last budget, this finance committee gave $6 million to UNH for hockey arena renovations. Thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Representative Timothy Hoare yet again, still from Stratford County District 10. Actually, I'm a season ticket holder of the hockey team, which, anyway, that's not what I'm asking about. We're talking about the EFA program. As you know, it's administered by an out-of-state nonprofit, 501(c), or some call them NGOs, and it has a specific agenda, primarily, largely to support religious education. At least one of the religious organizations, the Catholic Church, has some woke and pro-DEI elements to it. So I'm wondering, is there going to be, does this amendment, aside from increasing funding, make any changes to the governance of this program, which the constitutionality of it, according to state constitution, in my opinion, is very questionable. But then even just so if you have something that at least might be seen as promoting woke and DEI policies by turning over money to this, having an entitlement program run by this out-of-state NGO. So does the amendment do anything to allay people who are concerned about those issues? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. The amendment applies equally to everybody involved in education.
All right, thanks.
Seeing no more questions, I'd like to hand over the baton to Division 3.
All right, we've been thinning people out, so here we've saved the best for last, and there's less of a crowd. So I'm going to ask that we hold questions to the end of this presentation, and the reason for that is the DHHS budget is so integrated with so many features in it that it would be better to get through the whole thing so you can see the context before we start to take a look at specific parts of it. Division 3 handles the Department of Health and Human Services. Part of that includes the Veterans Affairs or the Veterans Home as an add-on. We have a little bit of oversight of the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and other drug misuse, as well as the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. All of those roll up under Division 3. So it's, like I said, it's about half the budget. This happens to be my third budget that I've done. The previous two budgets had a pretty reasonable growth and full funding in a tremendous number of areas. This budget is more difficult. And the first rule of economics is we have unlimited wants, we have limited resources, and that's the environment we find ourselves. Unlimited wants and limited resources. So we've had to make priorities, and I'll explain to you those priorities. As you know, this Finance Committee cannot spend more money than what Ways and Means projects. That's a hard and fast rule that's critical to our fiscal accountability and stability. That makes us kind of unique among states. You know, you don't want to be California right now. You don't want to be the state of Washington because spending in those state levels are out of control, and it's causing people to flee and go to other states as a result. We are a magnet for New England for a reason. So as my third budget, I want to let you know I'm not really happy about this. I wish we had additional resources because there are a number of areas that I would specifically want to fund, and I hope the Senate has more revenue than we had to have and maybe can take a fresh look at some things and smooth it a little bit differently. New Hampshire, for 10 years, has been rated #1 for return on taxpayer investment. That's a good thing. And over that 10-year period, our bond rating has been improving because of our consistent discipline of maintaining fiscal order. What we focused on in Division 3 were really the general funds. And if you go back to page 5 of this presentation, you'll see the sources of the revenue for the general funds. And although it impacts our federal funding, and we had some impacts on other sources of revenue, our primary focus was we had to manage our general funds. And so in this current year that we're in, it's called fiscal year 25, and it ends at the end of June. We are budgeted, and I hate to do numbers because that makes you think a little bit too much, but if you can just remember $1.15 billion, we have reduced in the first year of the next budget to $1.03 billion. So that's $0.12 billion that we've reduced out of Division 3. So that's more than 10%. And if you were to consider the inflationary impact, it's closer to 12%, but it is clearly a 10% reduction in the current year funding. Now, because we had less money, we had to be very clear on our priorities. And our priorities were really direct care. We have patients that are the responsibility of the state of New Hampshire in our hospital beds and the like, that we provide the medical staff and other staff to support. You know, for example, the Veterans Home has a census of about 225 veterans. We've got the Glencliff Home, which is where we have people with both mental illnesses and are developmentally disabled. This is a very high needs population there at Glencliff. We have the New Hampshire Hospital, which is a mental health institution. We have the Youth Development Center, where juveniles go when they are, the old word used to be incorrigible, and they need to have some confinement and some support. So those are places where we have direct obligations to provide patient care, and those were our priorities in Division 3. But it goes beyond that, because we spend quite a bit of money to help with the developmentally disabled community. To put that into perspective, the developmental disability community in this current year takes nearly 20% of all the general funds. So if you have to reduce general funds, there's some unavoidable part of it of looking at the developmentally disabled accounts. And when we did that, we tried to make sure that we looked at the indirect costs there. And then, of course, we have a community health system, a system of care that we try to maintain so that there's places for people who are under stress can go to get some immediate treatment and support. And there are other direct things that we do, but those are really the key ones. By the time you go through those and try to fund them as adequately as you can, you've taken a tremendous amount of flexibility out of the budget. And so we've had to make some tough calls, and we needed some more money. So in HB2, we've allowed anyone who wants to contribute $250,000 to the department to contribute it without having to go through the fiscal committee. It can go straight into an account. So if any of you have $250,000 you want to invest in our healthcare system, I have a way for you to do it. In all of our meetings, we would have special interests there and lobbyists all advocating for good programs. And pretty much in every hearing, I would start out by saying, is there anyone in the audience who is here to tell us where we can find additional money, or are you all here to ask for additional funds? And you may not be surprised, but there was never anyone that had an idea on how we could really save money or find bill payers in other parts of the budget. Now, to the credit of my colleagues on the committee, the Democrats, they did find a couple of bill payers where we could go get some money. One of them, Representative Stringham, made a suggestion that we needed to move some money to help Glencliff personnel, so we ended up defunding the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. When you put those two things together, it was a very obvious bill payer opportunity to go to a higher medical priority. And then similarly, Representative Mary Jane Wallner came up with a way for us to access federal money in the TANF area to provide more of a safety net and find some additional resources. So I do appreciate the collegiality of their efforts to help us find some more money. Now, what are the big movers in all of this? And I'm going to end up going through, starting at page 19, more on a line-by-line basis. But I want to summarize these major money movers so that you can see them in a bundle. We had to take a back-of-the-budget reduction of $23 million a year. That's a very large back-of-the-budget decrease. So out of general funds of 1.03 billion, we're still asking the commissioner to save $46 million by management discretion over the next 2 years. This is the one I hate. This is the stupid thing that I ended up having to decide, and I truly hope the Senate fixes it. We had to take a 3% Medicaid rate cut. So everyone who is dependent on Medicaid would have to figure out how to do with 3% less revenue for the work that they're performing. Now, that's worth a little bit of context, because in the 10 years prior to the current budget, the Medicaid rates did not go up at the same rate of inflation. So in this last budget that we're in, the one we're in right now, the governor proposed that we provide 3% for a Medicaid rate, and Division 3 worked and decided that what we needed to do was to find an extraordinary bonus to Medicaid rates of 10%. And that 10% didn't go to all providers, but it went to the prioritized providers based on some very good analysis and good teamwork within Division 3. So in the current budget, we had provided a pretty significant Medicaid rate increase, and we're going to have to back off of that a little bit. If I had one thing in the entire budget that I would ask Finance and the Senate to fix, it's this 3% Medicaid rate. It's the number one issue from my perspective. Now, we decided that we would go into selling some properties. So, because we needed cash, we had to take some assets and convert them to cash. So we're taking the Philbrook home, which is on the DHHS campus, and we're going to rezone around it and see if we can sell it. There was an estimate of $7 million for that, and we think we can get $5 million. We only booked $5 million for that. There's a home in Manchester, and I'm blanking on the name of it, the Terrell House, that if you look at it, you'd say that's a $700,000 property, but it's got some asbestos and lead paint issues. And so by the time that got cleaned up and remediated, it's probably a $300,000 property. Now, this is bizarre for us to, in a budget cycle, be trying to sell property to make ends meet. But that's the intensity with which we had to look at this budget. We also have a campus in Hampstead. The Hampstead Hospital is an order of productivity. We transferred it in this budget out of our budget, and Dartmouth is basically running it kind of on an off-budget deal, and it's a good way for us to get the workforce we need without having the budgetary impact. But that campus is bigger than what we need. So in the budget, we said begin looking at shaving off some of the land offered to Hampstead or home developers so that we could get maybe $1 million. But the problem is that's going to take so long. That's a revenue for the next budget, not this one. We took a look at selling the Sununu property. Somebody was asking about what we had thought about the Sununu property, and we figured that's about an $80 million asset reasonably, and we really wanted to bring some of that into this budget. But because we still have tenants at YDC, residents, we're not ready to move them to the new facility yet. So by the time that was really vacated and then the place was marketed, that's all next budget cycle at the fastest. So that's about 80 million. And again, out of desperation, I asked the stupid question, which is, can we take out a home equity, something like, it's not really a home equity loan, but everyone can relate to what a home equity loan is. Can we take out the equivalent of a home equity loan on this? And it went to the AG and to DAS and to the department. And although it was an interesting idea because of bonding issues on it, it wasn't possible. So that property will someday be worth some money, but not in this budget cycle, unfortunately. We looked at other revenues. We looked at the Medicaid enhancement tax. We looked at the drug rebate program. The governor's team proposed and we accepted a proposal to charge the higher earning Medicaid patients a premium, like a copay. It's going to be a small copay, but that's how much we were looking for additional revenues. We brought in under a particular business plan some increased human resources in the department to go after Medicaid recoveries. What's a Medicaid recovery? If we have somebody in a nursing home who dies and has an estate and we never fully got the share of their resources that we needed to pay for their care while they were alive, those can go into a Medicaid recovery program where we can convert their personal assets and their estate to reimburse the state. So that was a little bit of a business investment that we did. Similar to that, we took a look at this little software program, DocuSign. Anyone who's bought property or done anything online legally, you know what DocuSign is. It's important to the productivity of the department to have it. So we went and said, we'll consider this if you show us the manpower savings. And they did. They took money out of their accounts so that we could justify investment in DocuSign. We weren't playing around, we were converting this into a business. I mentioned we defunded the PDAB so we could put some more money on personnel in Glencliff. We took a look at the Governor's Commission and the Opioid Abatement Board, and there's a tremendous amount of overlap in what those two boards do. I think in the future, like maybe next year or the year after, some consolidation between the two is in order because they have such similar missions. There's some distinctions legally in the settlement fund, but I think having looked at the language, that can be worked out. So those are the high-level examples of saying it wasn't enough for us to take what Ways and Means said and be happy with it. We went in an active, assertive search for additional funding opportunities. So, and as I mentioned, I'm not really happy with this budget. This is my least favorite, because there was a lot of programs with individuals who believe strongly in the program, and they just didn't hit a high enough listing on the priorities for us to fund them. And I'll go through now, starting at page 19, and because of all my talk, and maybe this will fly a little bit. First bullet on the 23 million back-to-back reduction, I mentioned that. We found, we were digging through contracts, and we found contracts that we thought the department really didn't need, so we're defunding those specifically for a $5 million savings. There's a simple thing that requires all DHHS contractors, that means healthcare institutions and the like, to comply with our state's Civil Rights Act and to treat all individuals with equal dignity and respect, which I think is just a good business practice and makes for a healthier society. Next, in the Office of the Commissioner, I mentioned that we funded 3 positions for Medicaid recovery efforts, and so you can see the cash involved there on the paper before you. We encourage efficiencies by funding the department's DocuSign. I mentioned that. We raised $5.3 million in revenue by selling properties. I detailed that for you. We defunded the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I told you that. Okay, so my first budget, what I found was that the governor in the prior budget had basically zeroed out IT. And so we were at a standing start with ancient IT on legacy systems and stovepipe environments, and we were not set up to integrate data and to manage our workflows. So one of the priorities of Division 3 in all 3 budgets has been to invest in IT so that we can get the productivity gains and we can get some additional compliance controls. Like, for example, there's an eligibility system that helps us make sure that those people receiving services are in fact eligible. Prior system was out of date and had fairly high error rates, so we've been investing in that. On page 20, Office of Medicaid Business and Policy. This first one is the one I hate, but it's real money, and it was money necessary to close the gap between a shortfall in desired revenues and a want for additional spending. So we put it in there, and I will highlight to the Senate. I'm going to finish before the questions. Highlight to the Senate that this is the number one thing I think they need to fix. We took a look at the drug rebate program. I mentioned that. We took a look at the transferring of some liquor fund money and did that so that we plussed up the general funds a bit. We accelerated home dialysis, which is kind of an interesting clinical improvement to the Medicaid system, because typically dialysis is done in an expensive outpatient clinic with transportation involved, but we have an emerging capability to do home dialysis. And so we told the department, the Medicaid group, to please push that. The savings could be greater than that, but because we didn't have a history with it, we were conservative. The House passed a position on elective circumcisions, and that saves a little bit of money. We reduced the Medicaid rates over the total budget. Year one and year two, it's about $52.5 million. Again, number one priority for the Senate to relook for us. Then we are directing the Medicaid group to take a look at the way outpatient services are provided to create the visibility to say you need something like an MR. You can typically go wherever you want and Medicaid will reimbursement, but what we're trying to do is use an MCO principle to say, hey, dear patient, if you go here instead, you get the quality of care and you save money, and we'll give you a personal incentive for doing it. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone but the more expensive outpatient services. But it's a way to drive efficiency and cost reduction throughout our healthcare system. The next two on Division of Economic Stability, what we did here was in the child care area, we wanted to make sure that we had a safety net for the wait list. We don't really want a wait list for people who need daycare, so we opened up a way for there to be a safety net of some additional funding. Similarly with the workforce program, that's the people who get employed by the child care centers. If there's an opportunity and need, we're authorizing using TANF money for that. So that's federal money, and I know some of you hate using federal money because we're broke. We're $37 trillion in debt at the national level. It's a national security issue in my view. And so I don't look lightly at taking federal money, but it's for the children. So on page 21, the Sununu Youth Center, they had a pretty significant budget estimate. It seemed a little, it wasn't really thought out very much. So we took a 10% cut from what they were proposing, which is still higher than what they have now. And in the second year, we did 15% because by then they should be transitioning to a lower cost facility where they can share services. And that change in how they deliver services wasn't included in the budget. The next two say elderly and adult services, but what they really are is what we've done to help the counties so that the counties have additional resources and therefore should be in a better position to avoid any property tax increase at the county level. On one hand, it's a one hand, the other hand kind of deal, but I think it's fair and balanced. On one hand, during COVID, the feds were giving us money for which we had no way to give it to the counties, even though it was intended for county nursing homes and the like. So that money stockpiled in a piggy bank. It had $22.5 million in it. The counties have made a claim on it saying that was really our money, even though there was no legal way to have paid them. You could make a technical argument that it wasn't their money, but I think the ethics in it was that we probably ought to view it as such. So on one hand, we don't have the cash, so we broke it into, with the agreement of the counties, into 4 equal portions of, I don't know, something like 6 or 7 million, 5, whatever 22.5 divided by 4 is. Then on the other hand, we have been protecting our nursing homes and counties from inflation by having the state cap the amount that the counties need to pay us for higher census. And in the current year, even though the law says that that cap was supposed to raise by 2%, we didn't. We held it flat because we had the money and we helped the counties. We protected them completely from one of the worst inflationary periods in U.S. history, at least in the last 40 years. But so this year we're going to return to the statute. We're going to ask them for the 2%. I'm sure they budgeted it because it's state law. And we're going to ask for a one-time premium of an extra percentage point to help the state out a little bit. They still end up on a net positive between these two transactions. Item 21 in the developmental services, you see 3 big old bullets that talk about how we're increasing funding. So we're increasing funding by taking a look at administratively how money was unspent in prior years, and we're carrying it forward to help with the current year. Then we're taking a look at children's in-home supports, and we're increasing it pretty significantly. And we added a safety net feature that if they start to run out of money, they're encouraged to go to fiscal committee. Similarly, in the acquired brain disorder services, we increased money pretty substantially, and the safety net is there as well. So we're trying to protect our most vulnerable. Okay, 22. The first line item, and this has had some interest, is we zeroed out the family planning money. This has gone to 4 outpatient clinics to provide well-woman reproductive services and helping them prevent reproduction actually as well by providing birth control and IUDs and the like. But it's also an essential part of our keeping people healthy and safe by doing STD checks and recovery. We zeroed it out. I think down in the southern tier, there are alternatives that would cost people some money. But up in Cohoes County, if I had more time with this budget, I would have looked specifically at Cohoes and tried to give Cohoes specifically some family planning money on this line. But we ran out of time, and that's something I'm going to flag to the Senate. We removed the funding for about $1.2 million over the 2 years for tobacco prevention and cessation. If you take a look at our tax revenues, cigarette use is declining rapidly, even though we're selling most of our stuff anymore, I think, to people from out of the state. We get a nice income from out-of-state cigarette taxes. But in this one, because it's indirect and we don't have any evidence to show the payoff, and we have all these direct needs, this one was lost at the trade-off level. We also took a look at a state loan repayment program that helps up in our more rural communities to help employees, particularly nurses, who already have gone to college, already have their degree, have already spent the money, but this was a grant up to $50,000 per person for them to sign a contract to ensure their continuity for a number of years, on the order of about 5 or so years. So rather than cutting the whole program, we grandfathered it so that anyone that was in it would continue to get the money. So we're keeping promises, but we're going to suspend new applications for the budget cycle. And I think this program needs to be relooked anyways, because there's a theory that if you pay somebody's loan who's already taken the loan, they're going to stay in the community. And there are a lot of other factors in different ways that we could use less money probably to have the same sort of recruiting draw. So there's that. On the Division of Behavioral Health, we're basically looking at the Governor's Commission, and we're looking at the Opioid Commission, and as I mentioned before, they're pretty redundant. And so we're trying to shift the money around to get some synergy in the money, and also to add direct cash to the general funds to where they can be spent for other priorities. We increased money for our community mental health system. The most we've ever spent is $31 million. They were on track at the last accounting of spending $24.1 million in the, oh no, actually that's in the books. FY24 ended 10 months ago. So that's a booked amount of $24.1 million. So we're funding them at the 31 million, which is the maximum that they've ever spent. So, you know, they wanted 49, and we couldn't do that. Then on the Glencliff, one of our good colleagues, one of the smarter guys with spreadsheets, took a look at how the balance between contracted personnel and employed personnel, how they related to prior years, and he discovered this massive hole where we didn't have, the governor's budget didn't have money in either the contracts or the personnel, and so if they ever hit a case where they needed to shift between personnel assets, they didn't have the financial flexibility to do that. He calculated, and the department confirmed it, about a $22 million need there. And that became a priority for us because it's direct care, it's mentally ill, it's developmentally disabled in a residential setting. And so we found a way to come up with 486,000 of the 2 million to seed, to create a little flag for the Senate to say, hey, here's an area where you can look at. And hopefully they'll have better revenue sources. So I want to, again, thank you, Representative Stringham. That was really nice analysis and work, so thank you. Well, on the Veterans Home, we went ahead and kept our commitment to veterans. We funded them at a census of 225, and because they have good leadership up there, we created some additional spending flexibility for them to be able to move money around within accounts to basically optimize their management of the operation. So with that, that's a presentation of all of Division 3. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. My name's Zoe Manos, and I'm from Stratham. Can you hear me?
I can, but I have to admit I have a hearing deficit, so you're a little foggy to me, but I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm very concerned about the family planning services.
Yes.
I'm very, very concerned about that. And I want to know why you're eliminating this funding for this program. These funds, as you mentioned, are used by 4 federally qualified health services centers to provide services for low-income Granite Staters, STI treatment, detection and treatment, breast exams.
I've heard your question, and this is my third budget. The prior two budgets, family planning was fully funded. I don't want to defund them. I have mentally ill people who are developmentally disabled that don't have the personnel in their hospital to take care of them. And so this got to be an unfortunate Sophie's choice between which programs get their funding and which don't. And as I mentioned, I would want to take a look at maybe carving out funding for COOS because it's so remote and so rural. I think there's a stronger case there. But down in the southern tier, even though they may have to pay something in order to go get care in another clinic, we have some federally qualified health clinics and we have other clinics. So it isn't as though we're leaving them in a healthcare desert. It's just that in the grand scheme of prioritizations, Division 3 made a partisan decision to not fund it. That's the answer to your question, and you're not happy with it, and neither am I.
Well, may I just follow up briefly on that? May I just follow up briefly?
Do you have a question? These are supposed to be questions.
Yes, it is a question. You just described this as being a Sophie's choice, but these are potentially life-saving services for women who need this care. And so it may be a Sophie's choice, but you're choosing between life-saving care for a group of people and other services that are also desperately needed. And
if that's the question, I understand the choice. And I didn't want to make the choice. In the prior years with more money, we fully funded family planning. In this budget, I put in the ability for people and companies to donate up to $250,000. So there are strong advocates of family planning that have a lot of money that if they wanted to, they could contribute their own private resources to help the public good. We need some help. And this is a community that has a lot of money that gets spent on political advertising. So and their executive directors are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really hard for me to think that it's essential funding from the state when relative to other priorities, it just didn't make the cut. And it seemed like there were other alternatives and other sources of funds. That's my answer.
Just one more brief question on this point. What would be the vehicle then for enabling funding to continue in Coos County? How would that be accomplished in this budget?
Continuing funding.
Or
this is a new budget starting July 1, so I don't think we have a provision for lapsing unspent money into the next budget year for family planning. I don't believe that's one of the rules. I think in this particular line item, the money that is unspent in the current year lapses back to the general treasury and basically contributes to the rainy day fund.
So then your view that at least COAS should continue to be funded is not realistic for this budget? Is that what I understand?
If I were on a task force or a committee or a commission taking a look at this, I would be an advocate for taking a very focused look at Coos County as being more of a special needs amongst the four.
The other question that I have is about the developmental disabilities wait list, which is not fully funded. And again, those are critical services.
Right.
And I'm wondering what the rationale is for not fully funding the wait list.
I would disagree with your premise. I'm going to disagree with the premise that it wasn't fully funded. The department came up with you can look at them, and it's still a difference of opinion. But the reality is that the funding level for the wait list came from the department based on their own best analysis of what they think the wait list requirements were. That it's still an estimate. So we took a look at that and we realized that we needed to go with a lower estimate that seemed to be somewhat reasonable. But because we anticipate that we could be wrong, we included in there a safety net so that if the wait list it starts to spend all its money, that the department can then go to the fiscal committee and ask for additional resources. So in a resource-constrained environment, that seems like a reasonable way of dealing with that ambiguity.
Thank you for taking my questions.
Yes,
I
yes, ma'am.
appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. And thank you for keeping it at a question. Hi.
Hi.
We'll go to you.
Thank you, Rep. Edwards. Linda Haskins, Exeter. The FQHCs are my sweet spot as well. So I appreciate that the pain that this causes to have to do these cuts. I can feel it from you, and I appreciate how difficult that must be. So the Medicaid 3% cut is going to affect the FQHCs most severely, I assume. Is that your understanding?
I haven't broken it down into a pie chart of pain, but I have no reason to disagree with your assumption.
So behavioral health is my sweet spot, and they are also doing counseling for people with addiction issues. It is healthcare, so I'm concerned about that. Do you think that the tobacco cut looked at vaping on the increase while cigarette smoking may be down? Vaping is really up among our young people. Were you able to look at that?
We considered it, and still determined that the greater health threat is from cigarettes, and they're on a decline, and that there isn't direct evidence that money spent on a cessation program translates into actual avoidance or reduction of bad habits. And at this point, society, I think, is accepted that cigarettes are nasty and no one should smoke them, and we don't let them into public places. There's a social shunning, I think, that is helping cumulatively to address the tobacco issue. The vaping issue, the bit I know about it is vaping, while not attractive or beneficial, is certainly less harmful than tobacco use. And so while vaping may go up, I think much of the same social forces can mitigate that and discourage it. I don't know that government has to do everything, and I don't know that the government spending $1.2 million over 2 years is going to really move the needle to convince a teenager to change their behaviors that their peer pressure might otherwise encourage them to do. I see limited effectiveness inherently in that government program.
I would just submit that the tobacco cessation campaign has been tremendously effective, and I would hope that we would do the same with vaping.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, if we pass it from the House, that will be something that needs to be brought up by the Senate. Yes, ma'am.
Tracy Brickey, Pennacook, in answer to your question that you asked at the beginning about how we could increase revenue, I think that if we were to reinstate the interest and dividends tax, and if we were to eliminate EFAs, we could come up with almost $200 million pretty quickly. That is not what I got up here to say.
So just to be clear, because that's a fairly tight shot group, I would say that the Finance Committee isn't in the business of doing Ways and Means job. It was the position of the House and New Hampshire law to not have an interest and dividends tax, and so we could not anticipate any revenue from a non-existent tax. So that was not even in the realm of something Division 3 could consider. EFAs is Division 2. We've spent a lot of time talking about EFAs. I have my own point of view. I think it's the #1 civil rights issue of the next decade, to have freedom of educational choice, and having raised kids in public schools, I know how valuable it is to have educational setting options. So I'm an advocate of EFAs and getting rid of means testing. Because
assumed you were.
I don't see the need for us to be discriminatory about who deserves a good public education. I think everyone does.
Thank you. I assumed that was your stance. I have one comment and one question. My comment is that I believe the budget of an organization should show what the organization values. This budget shows us what this organization doesn't value. What this organization doesn't value is all people. I want to go on record as saying I value all the people in New Hampshire, and I do not support this budget as presented.
Are you speaking about Division 3 or the entire
No,
budget?
the whole budget.
All right, I'm here to represent
I'm not
Division
done
3.
yet because I have a question.
And I
I need to
explained
know
my
what
priorities,
it
and they
is
valued people.
that this
As a
organization
believer in the Bill of Rights and
values.
the U.S. Constitution, I think all individuals are imbued with certain inalienable rights, and I disagree with the idea that there are individuals that are being disregarded or disrespected. I reject the premise. Yes.
Hello, Molly Howard from Hancock and Greenfield. Have you calculated the difference between what it would cost for the EFA to cover just what Governor
I'm not doing EFAs.
Oh, well, can I ask
we could consider if Division 2 wants to talk
can I
about
ask the question and
EFAs.
maybe somebody else could answer it? The difference between what Governor Ayotte
Well,
suggested...
why don't you hang on, because I think the gentlelady had a question. I don't know if you got to your question. I responded to your point. Okay, I think I answered it then. And Mr. Chair, Division 2, Representative Irf, do you want to?
So did you calculate the difference between Governor Ayotte's suggestion that the EFA vouchers go to people who are enrolled, who have been enrolled in public schools for a year versus just anybody? And secondary to that, how much would we save if we did not funnel public dollars into religious schools?
Well, first, they are not vouchers. People can call them vouchers as much as I want, but the definition of the word voucher does not support its current use. Second, we are not funneling anything into a religious school or into anything else. We are merely providing funds to parents to use on their children's educations. So I'm not really sure if there is much of a question I can answer there. Could you maybe ask it in a way that we don't get stuck on this?
I guess that I want to know if you calculated the difference between Governor Ayotte's suggestion that it go only to students who have been in public schools for a year versus every student in New Hampshire.
I wouldn't have those numbers up front. I'm pretty sure at some point we must have looked at them. But the answer to your question is yes, we definitely consider those factors in deciding to take the correct policy position, which is not to take the specifics of the governor's suggestion, but instead use the House position on the matter.
EFAs save us money. We're spending $21,000 per pupil in the state. When someone leaves the public schools, we give them less than $6,000. We're giving each student by the state about $7,000, and the taxpayers are adding another $14,000. When the student leaves the state, leaves that school, that should save $14,000. We'll still give them half the money in the first year and 25% in the second year. They will still get a stipend after the student leaves. Everything needs competition to improve. Public schools have not improved and have not had competition. We just see more and more money being spent and less accomplishment in grades. So stop thinking EFA is a good target. It's a big mistake. Thank you.
It is. I do have a question about Division 3. My understanding, and it didn't come up in this conversation, so it could be that my understanding is incorrect, but my understanding was there was an increase in copays for Medicaid recipients. Is that correct?
It's partially correct. Within the Medicaid population, it's stratified by income, and at the highest levels of the income eligibility, there is a small copay for that consort.
And is that going up, or is that a new thing?
Could you say that?
Is that copay going up, or is it a new thing altogether?
So I would say between those two options, it's going up, because other than the only place in which we charge a copay now is in the adult dental Medicaid program. And so this would be bringing in that experience into the more general medical care for Medicaid. So that would be a new premium for the highest income tier.
And what is the highest income tier for a family of three?
Well, whatever Medicaid eligibility is, it's a percentage of the federal poverty level, and it's like the top 10, 20% band of those at that. So.
Okay. So I guess my question is, where are they going to get that money? Because they are already on Medicaid, so they clearly are not well off. And where are they going to get that 3% when they're barely covering what they have now?
That's two different questions. One, you're asking about where people get money, and the other is what's the impact of the 3% Medicaid rate. That's going to hit clinics first and foremost, the actual providers. Your first one affects the individual patients. And our experience with the adult dental Medicaid program, people who value the service are able to find the $5, $10 in order to help with a copay. Asking people to contribute something to their health care when they're more in a position to be able to afford it is not particularly unreasonable in the view of many. The 3% cut, I've told you, it's horrible, I hate it, and I hope the Senate can fix it. I couldn't, but they're better and smarter than I am, so I hope they can.
I guess I might disagree with that last comment, but on that, thank you.
So you think I'm smart?
I think you're smarter than the people on the other side of the wall, maybe.
All right.
Or at least
I'm
as
going to
smart.
think you said I was smart.
So I have one more budget thing that I'd like to go over briefly, and that's page 23. Because people often ask, how do I find out how much we're really spending, or how much are we really taking in revenue? And because I look at House Bill 1 and it's full of all kinds of numbers, I look at House Bill 2, it's full of all kinds of numbers. The thing that draws them all together is what we call the surplus statement, and the one for the general fund is on page 23. So I just want to tell people how to read this, or the most important part of it. So there's a revenue section, there's an appropriation section, there's a beginning balance, and there's an ending balance, right? So this is what ties together the entire budget, and it's how we know what happens. And the key number is at the bottom of the page, the rainy day fund balance. Right now, you see it in very tiny type there on the left, the rainy day fund has $292.5 million in it. Okay. Our budget, given our numbers of revenue from Ways and Means, is we expect to have a deficit at the end of fiscal year 2025 of almost $149 million. That's on line 21 under House Finance. And you'll see that the rainy day fund is going down to $143.7 million. That's a huge decrease, over half, right, is being used up of the rainy day fund from this biennium coming in short. So we build that back up. If you look at the right-hand column in line 28, back to $256.7 million. If we didn't do that, the state's credit rating and our financial position would be severely damaged, right? So even though we are using something from the rainy day fund, right? You subtract from our current 292 million, this 256 we plan to end up at, we're gonna still be using close to 40 million, 36 million, I guess, from the rainy day fund, but it's not the 149 we're starting with, right? So over the biennium, not only are we having to cut just to make ends meet, but we have to cut to build the rainy day fund back to something close to what it is now, just so that the state's financial position is not severely compromised.
I thank you all for coming. I hope you appreciate how complicated this budget is, and you see all the decisions that have to be made. And I can assure you that every agency asked for more money, and we didn't have it. Tough decisions had to be made. We weren't happy about a lot of them, but they had to be made. We have to fund this state, and we have the responsibility of figuring out how to do it. It isn't an easy thing. It may not be a popular thing, but above all, the state has to be funded. There are also 28 bills in HB2 that passed this body. We put them in there to ensure that they would go before the Senate and not be killed. If you kill this budget, you are killing those 28 bills, because the Senate won't bother with them. Some of them were very well supported by both sides. It would be a folly to vote against this bill. There's things in it I don't like, but I have the responsibility to pass a budget. And remember, we're one of the lowest cost states in the country. That's why people move here. We respect that. We keep the taxes low, and we don't talk about adding new taxes. I don't think anybody but one or two people have told us we need to add more taxes. I don't think that's supported by the public. We tried to take a look at this to see if there were places where alternative funding could be found, or where the user pays a little more, which seems appropriate. If the user pays, rather than asking everyone else to pay for what I want, I'll pay a little more for what I want. So we'll be available again to ask more questions. I'm sorry we don't have the answers you'd like in every one of them, but they were not easy. Did you have one more? All right. But I thank you all for your coming, and you realize the enormity of this action. Thank you.